So yesterday we were discussing communalism, secularism, and we had started with regionalism. So we had discussed the basics of regionalism. What is regionalism? What is this idea of region? And then we were looking at various instances of regionalism in India. So we were saying a state or a region within a state can ask for more autonomy. A region can ask to get separated from the state. And the main point was this idea of regionalism comes in between the idea of nationalism as a whole. So whether it is antithetical to nationalism or not is something that we will look into. But the thing was that it becomes an issue once the people from a certain region start asserting their rights and they say that it is our interests which are primary and they overlook the interests of other regions and the nation as a whole. So these are a few instances of regionalism, and I hope you have gone through these. What we'll do now is we'll look at recent growths of regionalism and discuss what are the positives and negatives of regionalism. Because by now you might be confused that if there is a feeling of regionalism, is it going to be a problem to the nation state or not? We will come to that. So look at these few considerations. Think of your various recent regional trends. Now, in these considerations, you'll find that it is mostly on the basis of socio-economic development that a region within a state says that we are not being given due share within the state. We are not given enough political power. We are not given enough autonomy. And that is the reason we are lagging behind in various indicators of socio-economic development. Now look at Punjab and Maharashtra, and it is not just limited to Punjab and Maharashtra. It can be extended to your Western Uttar Pradesh. It can be extended to Haryana as well. That post-Green Revolution, you'll find that a few states started doing well when it comes to agriculture. The agricultural productivity increased, and ultimately the returns that the farmers were getting out of agriculture increased. Now this newly emerging middle caste, or you can say think of the traditional farmers, traditional farming caste, like take example of Jats in Haryana, take example of Jats in Punjab, take example of Yadavs. So these middle castes, they started faring well. And these were the ones who started supporting this push towards regionalism. Why? Because they wanted to limit this impact. They wanted to limit these positive impacts of various forces like Green Revolution, limited to their region. Then you think of Northeast. Now, another reason when it comes to the idea of regionalism is if the area is detached from the mainland. If the area is not very accessible, think of various tribal regions you have in Northeast. They are lagging behind in terms of socio-economic development. Now, you would say that why is it so recent then? Because if you look at tribals, they have been lagging behind. They have been lagging behind forever. So why now? And now you see that slowly when we have better means of communication, when we have more and more expansion of mass media, we have better roads connecting these areas. So those people also get a glimpse of how socio-economic development of the other regions has impacted people. That now they have better avenues to take care of their health. They have better avenues to get education. And therein you find that they'll also start having demands that we should be given more autonomy and we will fare well. And it generally comes from the political class that we will fare well if we are given more autonomy compared to what we have right now. Similarly, the idea of religion, and a few of you were asking about the differences between communalism and regionalism, and we were saying that when it comes to communalism, it is primarily the idea of religion, whereas in regionalism, it is region that finds, say, primacy. But you'll find that all these factors that distinguish various regions can overlap. So it can be language and socio-economic development. So not every region has been developed equally in our country. So people from a certain region, they have, say, they speak a different dialect, and they feel that it is because of these cultural, because of our cultural identity, that we have been lagging behind, that the state is not taking care of us, and they start with these demands. So similarly, if you come to Punjab and the bifurcation of Punjab, in Punjab and Haryana, you'll find the primary factor there was religion. One, it was language as well, but yes, the primary factor was religion. Now, because of this religion, you will not find, say, widespread religious conflicts, but ultimately you found the demands of regionalism which bifurcated the larger state. Then also you can think of the demands that various union territories have been keeping. Think of the demand for separate state in Delhi, that they want the status of a complete state rather than being say, centrally administered territory. They want a separate state. They want to take care of the administration, etc., all by themselves. So these have also been more recent, for that matter. Now look at various ideas. Now these are basically factors which have pushed this growth of regionalism in our country. Now most of the factors you'll find that they are either on the basis of economic development, or they can be for the idea of more autonomy. Just think about this. Now we are seeing that various liberalization policies, FDI policies, are becoming a reason for this growth of regionalism. Think of the southern part of the country, which has progressed more compared to the northern part. And if you remember, in the chapter on urbanization, we were talking about the same, that the southern part of the country is more urbanized compared to the northern part. Now, because of this, you'll find that there is a growth of regionalism within those states. And if you look at other states, when they start comparing, when they start looking at the relative deprivation, they find that they are lagging behind, and they want more autonomy. They want more investments to come. They want more and more of the people to get employed there. Also think about the idea of jobs. So these states which have developed more, they feel that people coming from outside are a threat to our culture, are a threat to our economic stability. Why? Because they take our jobs. Because of which you find that there is a growth of regionalism in the state where people are migrating, say your southern states. At the same time, there is a growth of regionalism in the people coming from other states as well, because they feel that we are not being treated at par with other people of the state. So they would also want, more and more share of this economic development of the country. So think of the state or the position of your migrant laborers, migrant workers in Maharashtra. Now, yes, there is, say, Marathi sentiment that this state belongs to Marathis, and they should be the ones who get the most benefit out of the development of the state, and they do not want any outsiders. At the same time, the people who are coming there, who are facing this discrimination, also become a party to regionalism. Then over centralization of political power at the center. Now you find that whenever there is a strong center, the states in which you have, it is not necessarily only the states which have different political party in power, but other states as well. Think of the states which have the same political power or same political party at the center and at the state level. There as well, people also start protesting or reacting against this over-centralization. That why is the central government behaving like a big brother? Why are they entering into, say, finer aspects of day-to-day administration? This also has been seen recently. Now, again, you would say that where is the problem? Because it is ultimately the center who will decide the agenda, the larger agenda for development. But that is fine. as far as the objectives align with those that are of the state, it is fine. But at times you'll find that it is center which goes on entering the day-to-day life and day-to-day work of people from various states. And also people feel that the party in the center, just think about the situation right now. You find that there is a push towards regionalism in the southern part of the country. Why? Because the South or the Indian South thinks that the party in power primarily belongs to, say, your northern states. It is northern states which are being at the center stage of politics and economic development, and they come up in reaction against it, which strengthens their regional sentiment. Similarly, recently we find that there has been an assertion of different dialect communities, that within the same state, say of Andhra, you have people speaking various dialects. Now, on the basis of this, people from Telangana, the present Telangana, started demanding their rights, that we have a different dialect, we speak a different dialect on the basis of this, and we are socio-economically backward compared to the entire state. We have less political representation. On the basis of this, you find that they started demanding for a separate state. Then decline of the Indian National Congress as the dominant party. Now what happens is, when there is a strong party at the center, one idea is that because of over centralization, because of say more push towards your unitary form of government, you find that people react, and which pushes the idea of regionalism. Also at the same time, you find that when the central party or the major party in power starts declining, various regional parties will come up. They'll start asserting their identity in various regions. So if you look at the decline of Indian National Congress, it has been followed by, rather it has been simultaneous with the growth of various regional parties in most of the states. And now these regional parties count on these regional sentiments, count on the connectedness between people, count on this cultural identity that people have to demand votes. So the decline of Indian National Congress has led to a growth of regional parties. That regional parties are growing. Now, you might think of the same argument today as well, because right now we have the major state or the major political party at the center as BJP. So what is it leading to? Whether there are sentiments against this, say, unitary government, or against the over-centralization, because over-centralization mostly relates to administration, whereas you find that the growth of any central party or any national party is not synonymous with over-centralization, right? So there can be different cases. The party at the center might give more freedom to various states to act as per their will. So if I ask you right now, what is the case? With the rise in the power of BJP, what has happened? Whether it has led to a growth of regionalism, or it has led to a decline of regionalism. What, according to you, is the case? So yes, one is the idea of over centralization, and because of this, you find there is a growth of regionalism. There has been a growth of regionalism. But at the same time, you'll find that if you take cases from various states, the regional parties have been on a decline. Just think of various states. For instance, you think of Maharashtra. In Maharashtra, you'll find that the regionalism has been on rise ever since the BJP came in power. Similarly, BJP has also aligned with various regional parties, for that matter, which ultimately can be seen as dilution of regionalism, as a decline in regionalism. And you have examples from various states. So yes, decline of JDS in Karnataka, the Deve Gowda party. Yes, so they have, say, they have joined hands or joined powers with various regional parties like in Haryana. And they did the same in Maharashtra. They did the same in Bihar, in Orissa. But overall, if you see that the reaction has been mixed, and this is something that this is more of a political discussion which we need not go into, but the only idea is you have to see with the growth of national parties what happens to the sentiments of regionalism. Then economic non-performance of various large states, and I think you already have the examples of various large states, has also led to say a sentiment of regionalism, that various regions within the larger state say that because of the complexity in administration of a larger state, it will be better to create smaller states out of this larger state so that they can take care of their various issues, their different issues. And this is this is bound to happen because say within a state you will find that there is a region which is, say, densely populated. Say this region is densely populated. At the same time, there is other region which is more forested. You have more tribal population here. Think of this. Now you'll find that in terms of representation, the densely populated area will have more representatives, and ultimately, because of regionalism being a psychic phenomena, being something inherent in our attitudes towards everything, you find that the areas which are densely populated or the areas which have more political representatives are better developed compared to the other region, and this also becomes a demand. So you see that the demand for regionalism need not be in direction of or in line with only one factor. There can be multiple factors working at the same time. There can be multiple factors working at the same time. So they can, if the larger state is not overall, the larger state is not performing well, then various regions within the state might say that let's split into smaller states so that we can take care of the socio-economic development of our own regions. Then because of this difference in socio-economic development indicators, the states might think that let's get separated, because it is not always a sentiment which will come from the one which is lagging behind. It can come from within the state, from the state as a whole. So the idea of various regions being treated as peripheries, various regions being, various regions lagging behind in this process of development can be another reason. Then perception of economic discrimination and urge for speedier economic development. So the states which are not developing at a say greater rate, they might feel that the center, for instance, the center is being biased. The center is not giving due attention to our backwardness. The center is not playing enough role to get more FDIs in our areas, to get our areas more industrialized, which can also lead to demand, because this demand cannot always be about, say, leaving the larger union or separating from a state. This can be about demanding more resources, and this can be seen in terms of the demand for spatial status by various states, that we are lagging behind and the center has to, or the nation as a whole has to, give more attention to our problems. So in this regard, you find demand of spatial status or spatial category by various states. Think of Bihar, think of Andhra Pradesh for that matter. And in this regard, this is the basic idea of being treated as a periphery, that why are other regions developing at a greater rate and not ours? Then can anyone suggest that how widening of electoral democracy can be a reason for the increasing demands of regionalism? How can this be a factor? How can widening of the electoral democracy can be a factor? So yes, one idea is demanding for more representation because they have less representation. Then you find that uh, with the widening of electoral democracy, with people exercising their rights to vote, with more and more people, say, turning out for voting every year, you find that they also get awareness of what is happening around. And their various political leaders, social leaders will come up and say that look at the other region, look at other areas, how well they have developed, and why can't we develop at the same rate? Similarly, yes, the idea of appeasement, that various political leaders will start appeasing these masses, because ultimately if they appease them, they can convert them into vote banks, and they will, say, either give in to their demands of regionalism, of, say, more and more power, more and more autonomy, or they might be the ones who fuel these demands, because previously people might not be aware, people might not have this idea of greater autonomy, people might not have the idea of disparity between various regions, but this political class, for the sake of vote bank, can fuel these demands. Then think of green revolution. Now, one idea is that because of betterment, because of benefits of green revolution, states giving more push to regionalism because now they are well off and they want to contain those impacts, or they want to contain the development within the region. Other idea is the states which have not benefited out of green revolution might feel that we are lagging behind. So the eastern states, for that matter, who have not reaped the benefits of green revolution, who have not been able to reap the benefits of green revolution, they might have the sentiment that because there has been disparity or there has been discrimination in treatment within various states, we find ourselves lagging behind. So these can be various ideas of growth of regionalism. Now you do not have to limit it to, say, creation of a separate state. It can be about demanding more autonomy. It can be about asking for more share of, or greater share of, economic resources. It can be about reserving jobs for people belonging to the same region. Now the idea comes whether these demands are positive or negative, because one idea is very negative, which says that we want to secede from the union. We do not want to be a part of this Indian Union. So which is completely negative because it is against our constitutional principles. But it can be positive as well. Just think about this. If there is this region which, and say this is within a country, there are 2-3 regions. Now within this region, there are people, or this region is not developed. And they say that we are lagging behind in various indicators of development, which ultimately does not reflect well on the socio-economic indicators of the entire nation as well. So yes, one, we are lagging behind, but it is also not reflecting well on the socio-economic indicators. So why not give us more autonomy? Why not make us a separate state so that we can take care of these demands? Similarly, this area can say, this region can say that we have a different culture, our cultural identity is different, and because this larger state is imposing its ideas or its culture on all the people, it is not better for our culture. So to preserve our diversity, why can't we become a separate state? And you find this. Just think of West Bengal, think of the region of Darjeeling, etc. So they have say different culture, they speak a different language, and they say that the imposition of the same language, of a uniform language, is not in line with preserving our cultural diversity. It is ultimately becoming a, say, barrier in socio-economic development, because we want more representation from our area. We want our people to develop on the same lines as the other regions. But because of this language barrier, we're not able to. So this idea, this demand for regionalism can be positive in that sense. Similarly, a state which is underdeveloped, say, think of this entire state, this is underdeveloped, and this is a state which is fairly developed. Now, this underdeveloped state will think that, see, there has to be something wrong with our policies, that we are lagging behind, because we get the same share or equitable share from the center in terms of resources. We have complete autonomy, but still we are not progressing, we are not developing. And let's revamp our strategy, let's revamp our policies, let's revisit our development strategy and try to achieve more, try to make things better. So there can be a positive competition, right? So this competition need not always be negative. There it can be positive as well, that this competition might lead to better growth in this region. And ultimately, if we see that out of this demand for creating separate region or more autonomy, you'll find that it might as well work for the betterment of both the regions. So there is a state, and this region wants to get separated out of the state. Once they get separated from the state, both get separate resources, they get autonomy in their regional affairs. Now, this might happen that both the regions start developing at a greater pace. It can be out of competition. It can be because now the administrative system is not that complex. They can take care, or they can cater to the specific demands of their regions. Because if it is a larger state, and you find that when it comes to larger states, they are not doing very well for that matter. And once they get separated, they start doing well, they start doing better in terms of socio-economic indicators. So this regionalism might not always have a negative connotation, and particularly in India, we find, apart from a few instances of, say, separate state of Kashmir, or a few sentiments here and there like in Punjab or Northeast, otherwise we find that the demand for regionalism has been more directed towards socio-economic development. It has never come in the way of development of the nation. It has not been negative for that matter. So if a state is demanding to get separated from a larger state, it is not coming in the way of national development. It is not coming in the way of nationalism, the idea of nationalism. Because ultimately, what is the idea of world peace? Right? If you think of various sustainable development goals, etc., the basic idea is, if every region is prospering, it will ultimately lead to the prosperity on the international level or on the global scale. That for the entire world to prosper, all the various units, the smaller units, have to prosper as well, which is the idea of, human development. And that's where you find that various indices that you find in, or various goals that you find under sustainable development goals, are the ones which have been mutually agreed upon. And you see that once you take care of those indicators, once you have a push towards human development, it can ultimately lead to betterment of the entire world. Because when we think of poverty, or when we think of, disparity in socio-economic development, we find that it is not just the specific region which this low socio-economic development, affects, but it is various regions related to it, because people will start migrating. There can be social tensions because of this low levels of socio-economic development. So ultimately, even if we create smaller regions, with more autonomy, with, say, grassroots democracy working, with a strong civil society, it can become better, or it can work for betterment of the nation as a whole. So there can be a few positives of regionalism. So just I have covered these ideas, just look at them one by one. So socio-cultural diversity is given due respect because with more autonomy, they'll be free to choose the language of instruction in schools. They'll be free to choose their administrative language. They can work out the measures to actually strengthen the cultural diversity in that region. Similarly, it gives a scope for balanced regional development. So if these areas get separated, they start focusing on the socio-economic development in their particular specific regions, ultimately all the regions will be more or less say developed on the same lines or developed at the same level, which is good, right? Because it avoids a lot of problem. Then people would not have to migrate for work. People would not have to migrate for getting better healthcare facilities. They can find everything within the state. Then it gives a sense of self-determination because you find that most of the conflicts, starting from say your tribal conflicts, why do those happen? Why did those happen? You find that people had a feeling of various policies by the central government being imposed on them, and they wanted more and more autonomy in their regular functioning. And this sense of self-determination ultimately becomes an incentive to work more because they would have to prove a point. Like in the case of religion, we say that the newer religions have to work hard. The newer religions have to say give more push towards development, or say portray them as portray themselves as good because they have taken up a challenge, right? So the newer the religion is, you'll find it to be more and more aggressive for that matter, because the older religions would not have say a lot to prove. They have already made their point. Similarly, a new region that is created out of a that has been say taken out of a state, they would have a point to prove that see, we are working hard and we are faring better compared to our neighbors. So think of the idea of competition, because yes, mostly the competition between India and Pakistan is negative, but think of this in a positive way. If they try to keep themselves focused to their own problems and their solutions, how positive it would be, because they will have people in India and people in Pakistan, they'll have a sense of say doing better than the other region or doing better than the other nation. And these units are ultimately the building blocks of the nation. So if one region is doing well, it is good or it is better for the image of the entire nation, because you find that a few regions which are underdeveloped, a few regions which are not doing well in terms of socio-economic development reflect on the overall indicators of the nation. And on the basis of these indicators, various various companies, other nations will think about investing in your country. And also it gives you more weightage, more strength on the global front. So you are perceived as a stronger nation. So these can be various ideas about how regionalism can be positive. Then you think of negatives of regionalism. The very first negative is that with this feeling of regionalism, there comes hatred. With this feeling of regionalism, there comes violence, which can ultimately become an internal security threat to the entire nation. Because of this feeling or negative feeling of regionalism, people would want only their region to prosper. And they can also think of not letting the other region prosper. So which can become a barrier or a threat to the development of the nation. Also, you find that whenever you can think of this from your politics, where say smaller parties will come up, form the government together. So you'll find that ultimately these alliances do not work out, because every state or every political party will have different demands, and it will become very hard to reach a consensus that okay, this is your share, this is how you're going to do it or use it. It becomes a problem. Why? Because everyone wants more and more out of that share. And in a similar manner, you'll find that the central government is framing a policy with an objective of, say, XYZ, that we have to reach these objectives, keeping in mind interests of the nation as whole. But this politics of various regions or various regional parties will come in that way, and they will start and go on reacting against these policies, and ultimately render these policies useless. And you can see that in various cases. And the idea of violence, you think about any sentiment of regionalism, think about the fight between Karnataka and Tamil Nadu over sharing of river water. It has taken serious violent turns back in 2015-16. Similarly, if you think about the bifurcation of Punjab, you find that there was widespread bloodshed. Similarly, people in Maharashtra, people going from other regions, it becomes a threat to them, or it becomes a physical threat to them. And therein, if you remember, we were saying that wherever you find minorities, you'll find them living in specific regions, specific pockets. There is a ghettoization on the basis of religion, on the basis of culture, on the basis of your regional identity. So you'll find, if you go to any city, there'll be, say, if you go to, say, Bangalore, you'll find people from other states living in different pockets. Yes, it is a metropolitan city. The commercial areas have more or less uniformity in terms of settlement. But otherwise, you find that the eastern part of the city is inhabited by people from a certain region, then the western part from other region. Why? They have this tendency of living together. They have this tendency of staying together for the sense of physical security, that they are minority in that state. And what if there is something? What if there is a problem in the future? And this is more or less universal for that matter. You find this kind of, say, ghettoization everywhere. This ghettoization can be on the basis of your class. It can be on the basis of your region or regional or cultural identity. Then politics of vote bank based on language, culture, etc. And this is something widespread. This is something that you find manifestation in every state. For the past few years, you find that in every state, there are these regional parties are playing this language or identity card. They're saying that the central government or the national parties would not take care of you. We are the ones who will take care of you. Why? Because we speak the same language. Why? Because we are culturally similar. And it creates this polarization amongst people. Similarly, this polarization can be seen in terms of caste. It can be seen in terms of religion and region as well. Then you find that because of this, just think about this. If there is the sentiment of regionalism, which is leading, say, not to violence, but at least to a lot of social stress, political stress within the community, would people want to invest there? Would people from other states or other countries want to invest there? And the answer is no. And if they do not invest there, ultimately it is working for the detriment of those regions. They will stay underdeveloped and they will fall in this vicious cycle of underdevelopment. So you can take example of various states. Like, think of Madhya Pradesh. Yes, they have been, the state of Madhya Pradesh has been doing better as compared to what the situation was previously. Similarly, Bihar as well is doing better compared to what was the say state previously. But ultimately, they have been lagging behind way too much in terms of, say, development compared to other states or compared to the national average. Similarly, the regions which are troubled with the it is not just limited to regionalism, but otherwise you can think of communal issues, etc. People do not want to go there. People do not want to work there. People do not want to invest there. And you find this becomes a reason for this disparity or unequal development. Now, this can impact the development of human resources. Ultimately, if the region is troubled, if there is stress, if there is problem, people rather than, or the governments rather than investing on creating human capital, rather than investing in skilling people, educating people, they'd be more concerned about various populist measures that can be taken up to consolidate the vote bank. Similarly, people on the level of society, people would not want to take up any other things, or would not want to say migrate to other region for their betterment. They would want to stick to that region. They would become a part of that politics, and you find this happening, right? Yes, there are people who will start migrating to other regions. There'll be a few governments, or say few policies which will target education, skilling, etc. But overall, once they fall in that vicious cycle of underdevelopment, those states remain there. And you see this. You have examples from various Indian states. The states which have been lagging behind since the beginning, they're still there on the same level. The level of, say, or the growth of development has not changed much. Yes, it is increasing. Yes, things are getting better, but the rate is not very high. And ultimately, if you are troubled, if there is this regional sentiment, if there is violence based in this regional sentiment, ultimately the image of the country in the global arena is not going to be very beautiful, is not going to be very good, because they'll have, or the other countries, various companies will have an impression of the country that either it is because of over centralization of administration, it can be because of undemocratic means that the entire country is troubled, and they would not want to invest there. They would not want to have better relations with those countries. So these can be a few negatives of regionalism. Now just think about this. A question can be directed in any direction. So one idea is that you think of regionalism as a positive phenomena, as a positive process, because it can ultimately lead to betterment of the particular region in question, which is a building block, or which is, say, a unit out of the entire nation, and will reflect on the progress of the nation. Similarly, it can be negative in various ways. And you find that even though we say that in India, regionalism has more or less been compatible with the, say, overall policy framework of the central government, or in lines with preserving the unity of the nation, but you find that whenever there is a regional conflict, it generally takes a violent turn. Whenever there is a regional conflict, it takes a violent turn. It is not necessary to have a lot of bloodshed, but ultimately it reflects on various indicators. It reflects on the state of the poor in those regions. So with this, let's do one thing. Let's look at what kind of question has been asked in the past. So I hope you are aware of the categorization of the factors of regionalism. Let's look at this question. It will give you a fair idea that how they can ask a question. What is the basis of regionalism? Is it that unequal distribution of benefits of development on a regional basis eventually promotes regionalism? Substantiate your answer. So the first part of the question says, what is the basis of regionalism? What is the basis of regionalism? You can think of various factors that lead to regionalism. Right, yes, absolutely. You can think of various factors. Now, out of these various factors, what are these various factors? Just think of it. One is the unequal distribution of benefits of development, right? Then it can be on the basis of demand for more autonomy, demand for more political representation, demand for a larger share of resources. So ultimately, which become a factor or basis of regionalism. So we have multiple factors, yes. So cultural disparity, various dialects, etc. can be the reasons here. Now the question says, so with covering this part, you can tell the evaluator that yes, I know the various factors or the basis of regionalism. Now what you have to do is you have to now think of unequal distribution of benefits of development. that this eventually promotes regionalism. So one idea is yes, it does, and the other idea is no, it does not. So when you think of yes, because it is one of the factors out of the list of factors, right? One of the factor out of the list of factors. So one idea is yes, it is. So if you, when you say, the moment you say yes, what you have to do is you have to substantiate it. And I would suggest, rather than taking a hard stand that yes, it does, it always does, it is better to take a balanced stand. Not say yes, not say no, but give arguments for both sides, and give the side that you believe in or you have more instances from more weightage compared to the other. So one idea is that, take examples. For example, the example of Bihar, right? Then you can take the example of various current demands, Vidarbha region, right? And you can substantiate saying that unequal distribution of benefits of development has eventually led to this demand of regionalism, or this promotion of regionalism. Then you have to now think of no, because a few of you might be in the favor of saying no to this question, that no, it does not. It does not always. Then what options are you left with? So one idea is, apart from unequal distribution of the benefits of development, there can be other reasons. There can be other reasons, right? So therein you can talk about the cultural identity, you can talk in terms of religion, Haryana and Punjab, you can think in terms of linguistic diversity, right? Then you also have to negate the idea that this unequal socioeconomic development eventually leads to, or eventually promotes, regionalism. Do you have an example? Do you have an example of a state or of a region which is lagging behind? Still you do not find a push for regionalism, and these examples can ultimately come from your own states. Can anyone suggest an example for the same? No, see, when you're talking about Jharkhand, it is already done. You think of Bundelkhand, it is more of cultural identity. Telangana already done. If you think of Karnataka, yes, so it can be a very specific example, that if you compare northern part of Karnataka to the southern part, you'll find that northern part of the state has been lagging behind in most of the socio-economic indicators, but still you do not find a demand for, say, a separate state or more autonomy. So you think of, for that matter, you think of your northeastern region. You think of your northeastern region, there mostly the demands have been on the basis of cultural identity. You think of other tribal regions which have been lagging behind in terms of socio-economic development, but it is not on the basis of socio-economic development that they demand autonomy or they demand a separate state, right? They have, because ultimately that is their idea. When we think of tribals, we think of subsistence living. That is the idea. So on the basis of socio-economic development, they are not, say, thinking of this. And when you say, see, Himanshu, you are saying Dharavi, so it is a very small region. And again, compared to that, compared to the idea of regionalism that we're talking, it is way too small. So rather than thinking of this, at least think of a considerable region out of your own state. Okay, so when you try to address this question, you have the body part, right? You have the body part. When you think of this question, first idea is you briefly define regionalism and talk about the basis of regionalism, which will take up somewhere around 30 to 40% of your answer. This part will take up somewhere around 30 to 40% of your answer. Then you come to the next part, which talks about the unequal distribution of benefits of development. So you come to this part wherein You give arguments both in favor and against this idea, and then you conclude saying, that one idea is that yes, if you go for equitable distribution of development, ultimately it is better, it is more humane approach. And also, even if this unequal distribution does not lead to regionalism, even if this unequal distribution does not lead to a promotion in regionalism, nevertheless we have to aim for equal distribution, or say equal or equitable development of various regions, because it is not just limited to the scope of regionalism, there are other factors as well. And you can take up various suggestions from here. So if you want to say deal with the negatives of regionalism, deal with the negative regionalism for that matter, you can have various suggestions. So give more freedom to states, reduce this regional imbalance because these become the problem. Then whichever region is deprived, because the chances are they will more incline towards towards negative regionalism. So take care of those areas first, prioritize. Then there is this idea of acculturation, which is something that you have discussed in your chapter 1 and 2, when we were saying that, if you remember unity and diversity, we were saying that rather than imposing a uniform identity, or rather than imposing a uniform culture over everyone, it is better to acculture people, or to make people used to each other's culture. So rather than teaching them just their language, just their culture, give them a little exposure of other cultures as well, so that it does not come as a shock. Because tomorrow, if there is, say, increased incidence of migration from other regions, they are prepared. They'll be more accommodative for that matter. They'll be more tolerant. Similarly, if they tend to go towards other region, it is better, because we find that in India, the problem with diversity is that you cannot, say, prepare someone or prepare an individual or a society for each and every culture. Every culture is very diverse. We have diverse practices. The way people speak is different. Even within the state and within the community, you will find that the way people talk to each other, the way people address elders is completely different. So which might come as a cultural shock. So you think of the way people speak in Delhi and how people address each other in, say, the region of Lucknow or Uttar Pradesh in general. There is a lot of difference. So there are various, say, differences. There are multiple differences when it comes to our cultures, and we cannot possibly prepare a person, an individual, for each and every culture. So the best part is, yes, get them accultured. There should be, say, cultural exchange. It should be a part of the curriculum, so that since the childhood, children or the students are aware of the cultural diversity of our country, and they do not take a hard stand for or against something. Then also, if you start with this process, it will actually lead to more tolerance in the society. People will be more tolerant of others' attitudes. People will be more tolerant of other cultures, of other people, for that matter. Then you can think of developing means of transport and communication. This is particularly in the direction of the regions which are not very well connected to the mainland, regions which are, say, difficult, which have a difficult terrain, right? So think of your northeastern region. Now we do not have great connectivity to the mainland. So if you increase the connectivity, then people will have more interaction with people living in other places, which will make them more tolerant, which will make them have a better attitude towards other people. So these can be various suggestions to deal with the negatives of regionalism. So yes, the recent program by your Ministry of Culture, great. So yes, see, Abhishek, rather than promotion of pilgrimage, because promotion of pilgrimage would not be, say, a great solution to this, because ultimately pilgrimage is something that you do towards the end of your life cycle. So because that is the general connotation of pilgrimage. Yes, there can be pilgrimage at an early age, so it is better to think of various cultural exchange programs in schools the way you have in your Kendriya Vidyalayas. Then you can have cultural exchange in terms of, say, your administration in your colleges, so that people get accustomed to, or people get used to, people get an exposure of other cultures. Okay, because ultimately, if we fix these negatives of regionalism, we can move towards more and more unity. It will lead to better integration of the country. And you just think of your European countries in that manner. They were the ones who were involved in World War II, but once because they took a very negative way out of drawing their national boundaries, which was ridiculous for that matter. But ultimately, even after this lot of bloodshed, you find that they do not have, say, national borders, right? They have just they do not even have, say, any kind of barbed wires. They have open boundaries with other countries, irrespective of the history they had, right? So yes, why? Because they then focused on their own problems, they focused on the development of their own regions, and ultimately became more tolerant towards other regions as well. So with this, we conclude the discussion on regionalism. But remember, this question was, say, primarily they had asked about one factor of regionalism, but they can ask a similar question on other factors of regionalism as well. Just think of other factors and how you can deal with those. The way they had asked a question in communalism about relative deprivation and power struggle, and we were saying that they can ask a question on, say, any other dimension. Similarly, in regionalism, they can also ask a question on various other factors. They can keep it very limited. And ultimately, it also depends on what is there in your news, what is there in your current affairs. Now, with this, we move to our next chapter, which is on poverty. Now, this is the chapter, or poverty is a topic which finds a mention in both paper 1 and paper 2. And we were saying that the transition from social issues to social justice is going to be through this topic, even though there has been an overlap. When we're talking about role of women, when we're talking about elderly, we see a lot of overlap with social justice topics. But this is the chapter where we actually transition into social justice. And with this, we will take up the topic of hunger, which is also mentioned in paper 2. So let's discuss poverty. Now, before we think of poverty, before we move ahead with poverty, what do you think? What, according to you, is being poor? What, according to you, is the idea of being poor? So Akhil says lack of skills. Someone says less earning and less spending, lack of resources, unable to fulfill day-to-day necessities. So when you say that, just try to be, say, more specific about what are these day-to-day necessities. Less education, not having income, not able to afford basic needs, not getting proper food, getting low calories. So someone has identified using the old poverty line, which says that person not having an income beyond so and so rupees, economically weak, not having enough food below poverty line, not having shelter, not having purchasing power, etc. So we see that when we think of poor and when we think of poverty, we think of various features. Being landless, being a feature of poor, or being a feature of poverty. Not having enough say, in politics, or not having, say, enough, or not having a good status socially, can be related to poverty. Similarly, not having sufficient income, not having sufficient expenditure, because if you do not have sufficient income, then the chances are you will not be able to spend on food, you will not be able to spend on your education, on your skilling, on your food, shelter, clothing, right? So these are various features associated with poverty. Now, before we get into the definition of poverty and the ways to measure it, etc., let's think about what all can be the dimensions of poverty, because of some of you are talking about the economic dimension, some of you are talking about various social needs, various basic necessities like health, not having say enough education, skilling, etc. Similarly, some of you might have suggested something related to psychology, that the way they approach life or the way poor approach life is different. Then others might think of political power, that if you're poor, the chances are you would not wield any kind of political power, you would not have a good political status. So there can be various ideas, various dimensions of poverty that we will look into. So before that, just understand, when we think of definition of poverty or when we think of idea of poverty, it has been changing. So previously, it was based on the levels of income. That what is the income, what is the family income, on the basis of which we will decide that, say, 100 rupees is the limit, and people who do not have a family income of 100 rupees per day will be considered poor. So we draw a line on the basis of income. Similarly, over a period of time, we thought that how can income, say, define whether someone is poor or not? Why? Because this income can be used to buy liquor. This income can be used to, say gamble. This income might not reflect on your plate. And the idea from there moved towards expenditure, that what is it that you are spending on. And primarily, the expenditure was calculated in terms of nutritional requirement, that whether a person is able to fulfill her nutritional requirement or not. That this is the minimum amount of calories, say 2100 kilocalories, that a person is supposed to consume every day. And if someone is not consuming sufficient calories, they'll be considered poor. Now, with that, the definition, the idea started getting more and more expanded. Then the idea came, is it enough to have sufficient food? Is it enough to have sufficient food? Is having sufficient food a measure of well-being? If a person is being given enough food for the day, is it a measure of well-being? Is that person actually going to be able to fulfill his or her desires? Is that person actually going to able to be, say, to reach his or her potential? And the answer was no. So they started looking into various other factors. And with this, over a period of time, capability approach, that you need not remember, capability approach of Amartya Sen emerged. Now, the basic idea was, if people have sufficient income, if they're spending it on their nutrition, that does not mean that they are at par with others. So the idea was, if you look at poverty, it is defined to be a sustained deprivation of resources, capabilities, choices, security, power, etc. necessary. Now, you can understand other things. Let me come to the major crux of it. So they were saying that if you think of income, it is basically an input. A person having sufficient income. If you think of various material goods, it is also an input, right? That a person possesses so and so goods. But think about this, there can be two people who have equal amount of resources, but still the outcome is going to be different. There are two people, A and B. We give equal resources to both these people, exactly equal resources. Are they going to achieve the same outcome? Are they going to have the same quality of life with those resources, with those inputs? And the answer again is no. Just take example. Let's take example. So Amartya Sen has primarily used the example of a disabled person. So if person A is disabled and person B is, say, doing perfectly well in terms of all the health indicators, if you give these people equal resources, they are not going to achieve similar outcomes. So the input is same, the material possessions are same, which he basically called functions. Again, you do not need to remember about capability approach or what are functions, what are capabilities. Just think of the basic idea, so that it say clarifies the idea of poverty and the approach towards poverty in your head, in your mind, because that's where you will be able to understand why government is targeting the way they are targeting poverty now. So the idea is one, that if you give, say, a blind person a book to read and a person who's not blind a book to read, they have same inputs, they have same resources, but the outcome is going to be different. Why? Because person A is not capable of reading that book by herself, by himself. The idea again is relate it from the idea of equality and equity, right? The idea of equality and equity. So giving everyone equal resources is not going to ensure equal outcome. That is the basic idea. So Amartya Sen says that rather than focusing on these inputs like income, nutrition, why don't we focus on outputs? Why don't we focus on what is the actual outcome? What is it that they are going to achieve? So he says that it is not necessary that with these equal resources or equal inputs that you'll have similar outcome. And also, if you find that a person should have choice, there should be a choice. So think of a person who is malnourished, who is going through starvation, and think of a person who is deliberately fasting. A person who has taken up a fast for, say, Tuesday, Wednesday, whichever day, deliberately, and then there is other person who's starving. Do you think in terms of well-being they are equal? The idea is no, because the person who is deliberately fasting has at least choice, has at least option of having food, and he or she is exercising his choice not to eat. That is the basic difference. So Amartya Sen emphasizes on developing capabilities in people so that they can chart their own path. And that is the basic difference when you think of the older definitions of poverty and the newer definition of poverty. Just look at this definition. It says a human condition, poverty is a human condition characterized by sustained or chronic deprivation of resources. So one, resources are not there. Second, whatever resources are there, they are not capable to use them. Third, they do not have choice, nor do they have social security and power necessary for the enjoyment of adequate standard of living and other rights. So the idea is centered around well-being, that well-being is not just having enough, or not just having, say, enough resources, not thinking of resources in terms of a poverty line or various inputs. The idea of well-being is broad. The idea of well-being encompasses all the physical, psychological, environment, social factors. So the idea of poverty now is centered on well-being, and various indicators that you'll find across the globe which are used to measure poverty are basically based in this capability approach. Yes, there are shortcomings of this capability approach that we will come to, but you again do not have to think in terms of capability approach, because we didn't have a detailed discussion of capability approach. Rather, we used a few parts of the capability approach to apply to our GS part. But yes, we will definitely think of the shortcomings of capability approach when we look at the indicators based on this approach. So previously, if we say that it was it was based on inputs, it was based on material possession. But now the idea of poverty is based on well-being, is centered around well-being, whether a person is capable of realizing her potential. Now, before that, just look at a little data about poverty. Yes, we are going to cover this, so need not worry. Just look at this. 9.2% of the world population was under extreme poverty in 2017, according to World Bank. But again, this definition of poverty is based on an input. This definition of poverty is based on an input that these people were not earning more than $1.90, and now this $1.90 is not universal. It is again ultimately adjusted to purchasing power of various countries. If you look at 21 global multi-dimensional poverty index, and this is where we have to reach with our definition, what is multi-dimensional poverty? According to this, India ranked 66 in terms of multi-dimensional poverty out of 109 countries. So which reflects on very say poor position of India in terms of various indicators of poverty. Then you think of the recently published National Multidimensional Poverty Index, according to which India has done fairly well from 2015 to 16. The level of, or the number of multidimensionally poor people has reduced to less than 15% in these 4-5 years. So which is a good sign, and we will look at it. We will try to critically analyze this National Multidimensional Poverty Index. With this, you can use any of these definition, because this definition by World Bank also is based in your survival with dignity. But the basic question is that where do we draw the line? Because some of you might say that income is enough, some of you might say health, some of you might say that yes, person should get definition, but we have to reach an agreement with respect to what is the line that we have to draw when it comes to survival with dignity, or when it comes to well-being. Because the idea of well-being for you might be different, the idea for well-being for me might be different. And again, when you look at Amartya Sen's idea, it has left it open. It is up to the nations to draw that line. Where do you want to draw that line? So some nations might say that we will provide health, education, and provide, say, stable income, and that is our idea of well-being. Then the other might say, no, we are going to provide shelter as well. We are going to also look into what kind of fuel do you use, whether you have clean drinking water or not. So this idea of well-being can differ from country to country. So we do not have, say, a universal definition of poverty or what is multidimensional poverty, because you'll find that even when it comes to indicators, there are a lot of differences. So the thing is that you do not have to understand poverty as merely less income, not having sufficient income, not having sufficient nutritional intake, but you have to think of it as a multidimensional idea, a multidimensional aspect which has various dimensions. And we will come to these dimensions, you need not worry about it, and we will look into these dimensions, how they can be causes of poverty and how they can actually be consequences of poverty as well. So we are going to look into these factors in the light of vicious cycle of poverty, that we will take up at the end. But before that, what we'll do is we will try to look into the two basic ways in which poverty can be looked into, and then we'll straight away move on to your multidimensional poverty index. But before that, let's address this question: why do we need to address poverty? So one idea is again ethical, that ultimately everyone has a right to say to get their basic necessities covered. They have a right to a decent standard of living. They have a right to well-being. They have a right to achieve their potential. So which is an ethical idea. So the thing is that we generally take the ethical idea as yes, it is something very natural, right? And but generally when it comes to the way we act, we find working in the right opposite direction, that we do not think of the ethical dimension when we actually act on the idea of poverty. Now, the second idea is self-interest. So self-interest, just think of it in various ways. Think of it in terms of the overall national development. So someone has already suggested, Amit has already suggested, that it will ultimately be in the direction of national development, because overall indicators or socio-economic indicators of the nation will reflect a good picture. Similarly, the idea of poverty anywhere being a threat to prosperity everywhere. Just remember, just think of it. You had your communalism, regionalism, which can lead to violent conflicts ultimately based in this economic disparity. That it is because of the disparity in socio-economic development that ultimately we find problems like communalism and regionalism prevailing in our country, which become an internal security threat. And we were saying that if there are multiple regions within a country, if ultimately there is more or less an equitable distribution of, say, development across all these regions, it is going to be better for all the regions. Why? So that there are no, say, violent conflicts. You do not see a lot of migration or widespread migration, and you do not see a lot of other conflicts for that matter. So yes, one idea is being selfish, looking at the national development, because the idea of national development itself is also selfish. You cannot think of it as altruistic, that it is just for the sake of national development, it is just for the sake of creating a good picture of our nation globally, that we are addressing this problem of poverty. What if we did not have any kind of indicators of poverty? Would we still do that? That is the question, which takes us to the ethical dimension. That yes, we should do that. We should still take care of the poor. We should still work in the direction of alleviating poor from this problem of poverty. Why? Because it is our ethical duty, responsibility to take care of all the members of a society. Now think of various ways in which you can look at poverty. One idea is very simple, wherein you say that let's have a basket of minimum necessities, the basic necessities that we are talking about, which can ultimately differ from place to place. Some can think of it as nutritional requirement, some can think of it as basic income or minimum income. Then let's create a line. Anyone who does not have these material goods or this much income will be considered poor. One idea is this. Another idea is looking into the relative poverty. If you look at, say, if we take a general picture of the society and we see that there are few people who are rich and then there are others who are poor. Now these poor might have all their basic necessities covered. They might have the basic standard of living. But ultimately, if you see that there is a gap, then the other idea of measuring poverty comes into picture. Other type of poverty comes into picture, that is relative poverty. So let's look at them one by one. Okay, so with this we okay, so Bharti is saying that survival with basic dignity should be goal. But again, the idea, Bharti, is what are the basic standards? Who decides the basic standards? What should be the basic standards? According to you, basic standards might be healthcare and education. According to me, basic standards might be nutritional requirements. So we have to draw a line somewhere. And also, if you look at the relative idea of poverty, don't you think eliminating inequality or maybe reducing inequality should also be a goal? Reducing inequality in the society should also be a goal, so that everyone can have an equitable share of the resources. Okay, we will come back to this idea after discussing absolute and relative poverty. So generally, you find that in most of the developing countries where a lot of people are not able to meet their basic requirements, a lot of people are not able to take care of their day-to-day needs, you find the idea of absolute poverty being used, wherein they create a level of certain minimum basic standards of living. It can be on the basis of income, it can be on the basis of nutritional requirement, it can be on the basis of expenditure on various essentials. They create a line, and people who fall below that line, this is the line of basic standards, basic amenities. People who fall below this line are considered poor. Now, this is generally done in underdeveloped and developing countries. The reason is many people do not have these basic necessities covered. Then there is the idea of relative poverty. In relative poverty, it is basically they look at the entire society, entire country, and they say that they fix a bottom percentage. They say that, say, fix 10%, or the bottom 10% people in a society will be considered poor. Now, this is generally done in richer countries. Why? Because everyone has their basic necessities covered. People do not have a problem of getting quality healthcare. People do not have a problem of, say, taking care of their minimum nutritional requirement for the day. Yes, there are people, but the numbers are very few, and which can be dealt separately. So what they do is to think in terms of relative deprivation. What they do is they consider that the minimum or the bottom 5 to 10% of the people are going to be tagged as poor. Now, these poor might have all the basic necessities covered, but they'll still be called poor, and they'll still be beneficiaries of various government plans. That is the idea of relative poverty. Now, coming back to the idea of capability from here, or coming back to the idea of multidimensional poverty from here, you find that multidimensional poverty is more in the direction of relative poverty. Multidimensional poverty has a basis in relative poverty. Now, they are not going to tag, say, the bottom 10-20% of the population as poor, but the basic idea is, yes, there is a basic minimum standard of living. There is a basic minimum standard of living. People below that will be considered poor, but it also takes in account the relative poverty of people, that how poor a poor person is. So rather than sticking to the absolute measure by creating a line and thinking of poor, because below this line, you'll find people here, you'll find people here. There'll be people who say the line was 100 rupees, there'll be people who earn 90 rupees, then there'll be people who earn 10 rupees a day. Are they equally poor? No. But your absolute poverty, or the poverty line, would say that anyone falling below this line will be considered poor, without taking into account the relative deprivation of the poor, that someone is more poor compared to other person. But when we look into multidimensional poverty, you will get this idea clear. So Anushka is saying that poverty also includes lack of education, because uneducated people automatically come under poverty. Yes, and we will come to these ideas, that what are various factors of poverty. These factors of poverty will become clear from here, but we are also going to look into the causes and effects of poverty separately. Why? Because questions have already been asked from that dimension. If you remember the question of population and poverty, the relationship between population and poverty, it is basically based in that vicious cycle. So we will cover it separately. So yes, Himanshi, there can be people who are poorer compared to other poor, and we will come back to that idea. Do not worry about it. Now, this idea of multidimensional poverty is based in the capability approach of Amartya Sen, wherein we were saying that it is not just income, or it is not just expenditure, it is not just nutritional requirement which are factors of poverty. There are various other factors of poverty as well. Poverty is a multidimensional phenomenon, and you can understand this. So what I'll do is we will just create a vicious cycle of poverty before we go into these factors, so that you do not have to think that where these factors came from. I will come to that, where these factors have come from, but you should not have, say, a vagueness of ideas. So think of nutrition. Think of nutrition once. If you think of nutrition, if a person is not getting enough nutrition, If a person is not getting enough nutrition because they're poor, because if they're poor, they cannot afford complete nutrition. If a person is poor, they would not be able to take care of their nutritional requirement. If they're not able to take care of their nutritional requirement, you'll find that they would not be very productive. Why? Because they'll keep falling sick. And because they are not productive, they would not get a good job. Why? Because the employer would think that the other person is simply making excuses every other day, and they would not want to employ them. And also their health might not let them to be productive. Because their health is deteriorating, they're not able to work at all. And if they do not have a job, they will ultimately remain poor in the absence of any stable income. And if they are poor, then they will again not be able to take care of their nutrition. They will not be productive, would not get a gainful employment, and ultimately stay poor. So this is one idea of vicious cycle of poverty. So you can create this vicious cycle of poverty using all these factors. Now, why did we do this? To understand multidimensional poverty. Now, multidimensional poverty says that there are various factors which identify on the basis of which we can identify poor. It is not just income, or it is not just expenditure, or it is not just economic criteria. So rather than sticking to your traditional poverty lines based on income, they came up with this idea, this framework. So they have taken up 3 dimensions of poverty, because this is simple. Because if you think of psychological dimension, it is not very simple. 3 dimensions of poverty which are tangible, in which you can have various indicators to look into. So they took these indicators and they created 10 different factors or indices out of it. So the 3 dimensions are: one is health, other one is education, and the third one is basic living standard. Within health, they have 2 factors. One is nutrition and the other one is child mortality. Similarly, in education, they have years of schooling and school attendance. You might think that how these depend. I'll do one thing. I'll just cover them one by one so that we can rush it up later. In living standard, you have cooking fuel, sanitation, drinking water, electricity, housing, and assets. All these dimensions get an equal weightage of 1/3 each. Within these dimensions, all these indicators get equal weightage. So health has 1/3. So nutrition and child mortality get an equal share out of this 1/3. That is 1/6 and 1/6. Similarly, education gets 1/3 weightage. Out of this 1/3, years of schooling and your school attendance get equal share, 1/6, 1/6. Then you come to living standards. In living standard, you have 6 factors, or you have 6 indicators. So every indicator gets equal share of this 1/3. So that is 1/3 into 1/6. That comes up to 1/18 each. 1/18 each indicator. On the basis of this, first thing that they do is they calculate the head count ratio. That how many people are there who are deprived in these indicators. So they keep a threshold, they keep a minimum threshold, and on the basis of which they decide how many people are there who fall under the category of being multidimensional poor. That is one thing. The second thing that they do is they look at the intensity of poverty. Because think of this, there can be someone who lags behind in the indicator of nutrition but is doing fairly well in the others compared to, say, other poor. So someone might get a score of 1.5 of 0.5, and there can be someone else who gets a score of 0.7. Another thing is, you do not have to get into calculation. The only thing you have to understand is, one is they try to address head count ratio, that how many people are multidimensionally poor, and the second thing is they try to address the intensity of their poverty, that how poor is a poor. Intensity talks about how poor is a poor person or poor household. So if they lag behind in every indicator, they perform poorly in every indicator, they'll have more intensity of poverty. But you do not have to get into the calculation aspect. So this is the idea of multidimensional poverty. Even though it is multidimensional, but we still take care of only 3 dimensions, that is health, education and living standards. Now you would say that where did these factors come from? One idea is every factor is related to poverty. How? You would say how school attendance is related to poverty. How school attendance is related to poverty. Okay, so I repeat this. Multidimensional poverty says that there are 3 dimensions of poverty: health, education and living standard. Within health, education and living standard, you have multiple indicators which reflect health. So for example, nutrition and child mortality will reflect health of a particular household. Similarly, years of schooling and school attendance will reflect the education status of a household. Then cooking fuel, sanitation, drinking water, etc. will reflect on the living standards. Just think of this. Person who is, say, living in a kacha house, the floor is made out of cow dung, etc. The chances are that they are poor. The higher chances are that they are poor. Similarly, if they do not have a clean drinking water supply, they'll be poor. Just think of this. Any of the students sitting here in the classroom, do you have clean drinking water supply or not? So one is that the water supply is clean. You get good water, good quality tap water from the government. And the other idea is that if not, you will install, say, that RO or any kind of other water purifier. So you have basic standards of drinking water. Similarly, you have basic standards of sanitation. I believe that no one here is living in a slum for that matter. Why? Because otherwise this would not have been possible with no availability of infrastructure whatsoever. Then think of the cooking fuel you use at your home. Do you use LPG or PNG, or do you use firewood at home? What kind of cooking fuel you use? So Surbir, if you look at this, it is beyond roti, kapda and makan. So that means getting your nutritional requirements, clothing and housing issues taken care of. Okay, so some have electric stove and the others have LPG and some have PNG, right? So you find that you are using a clean cooking fuel. No one is using firewood. Yes, if someone is coming from a rural background, they might occasionally use, to prepare a few cuisines, they might occasionally use firewood just for the sake of it. But otherwise, everyone is using clean cooking fuel. Now, one problematic area can be education. So basically, we understand that if someone is not having access to education, they can be considered poor. But what about these 2 indicators? What about these 2 indicators? How would years of schooling reflect poverty? How would years of schooling reflect poverty? Yes, of unaffordability, child labor, poor economic status of parents, etc. Similarly, your school attendance as well. That if a person has to, or if a child has to go out to work, if they have to contribute to family income, they ultimately would not be able to attend school or, say, continue their education. Similarly, if they do not have proper nutrition, if they're poor, they are not able to afford proper nutrition or nutritious food, they'll fall sick frequently and hence their attendance levels will be low. Also, it reflects on the awareness levels of the parents. And the chances are, if you're coming from a poorer household, even the parents would not have good levels of awareness. Right, people would not be able to pay fee, etc. So these also reflect directly on the status of poverty. Now coming back to the main idea of multidimensional poverty. So one is they talk about three dimensions, that is health, education, and living standards. Within these, they have various indicators. They have 10 indicators in total. Now, this is your global multidimensional poverty index, which is an initiative of OPHI, that is Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative. Then on the same lines, on the similar lines, you have various national multidimensional poverty indices that we will come to. Coming back to it, you would say that why only these indicators? Why only these three dimensions? The simple answer is because these are three dimensions in which we can have tangible indicators, on which we can have some or the other data. But why these indicators only? Because there can be other indicators of health as well. If it is talking about child mortality, what about maternal mortality? What about health of other people within the family? Now, you would find that yes, there could have been other factors. There could have been factors of education, like whether your education has provided you a gainful employment, whether your education has bettered your status or not. But you find that those indicators are not very simple to address. We do not have any data on those indicators. So these are mostly the indicators which have been agreed upon globally. These are primary indicators of poverty which can be calculated, on which at least most of the nations have some or the other data. Yes, so Abhishek is saying that even though if you look at education, some might say that right to education is there. You can get free education. You do not have to pay a tuition fee. But then think about, and primarily it is not just because, Abhishek, it is not just because of say uniform stationery, etc., because those norms are generally not followed in your regional public schools. But ultimately you find that the dropout rate is high because most of the people have to get engaged in labor. So there was a report, you find that, which talks about boys and girls who drop out of school. And you found that most of the boys who dropped out of school after a certain age, after secondary classes, they were engaged in labor. They had to take care of economic needs of the family, most of the boys. Then similarly, if you talk about girls, most of the girls had to take care of household responsibilities. That was the reason they had to drop out of school. So yes, your idea is also in the right direction. But again, if you look at data, the picture is slightly different. Now coming back to it, so I hope you can create a vicious cycle with most of these indicators. If not, we are anyways going to take up all the other causes of poverty and look into that vicious cycle. Now all these indicators have been provided certain weightage. These three dimensions get 1 by 3 each, and I hope you can do basic maths, because it became slightly difficult for me to explain in the last class, and with my poor mathematical skills, but I somehow managed, but I hope so. So out of total 1, if you have to divide it in 3, 1 by 3, 1 by 3, 1 by 3, if you add all these 1 by 3, it will take up the total to 1. Now out of this 1 by 3 given to each dimension, every indicator gets equal weightage. So in health you have 2, in education you have 2, in living standards you have 6. So find that the 1 by 3 weightage of health, out of 1 by 3 weightage of health, nutrition and child mortality get equal weightage, 1 by 6, 1 by 6. Similarly in education, they get equal weightage, so on and so forth, right? Now think about various other indicators that could have been added. Just think about it. Ultimately we are going to cover, just think about various other indicators of health that could have been added here. Can you think of any other indicator of health apart from nutrition and child mortality? The third one that I've suggested is maternal health, but there can be other things related to health. Okay, malnutrition is covered, right? Malnutrition is covered. So yes, mental health could have been there, health of the elderly, life expectancy. Then you could have data on child stunting. Great. Yes, absolutely yes. Then so there can be multiple factors which can be included here. Similarly, in education, you could have thought of quality of, say, learning outcomes, right? If you have gone through the ACER report, they talk about learning outcomes. Then in living standards, not just these, there could have been other factors as well. But why these? Because we have a global consensus on these and we have availability of data on these. Now, when you talk about the absolute poverty, what it was doing was it was creating a similar line. Now, the basic standard it has created is in these factors, right? So these are the factors which, on the basis of which you create this line, and there are people who fall below this line who will be considered poor. That is your head count ratio. But I was saying that it also takes care of the intensity, that how poor are the poor. So they will look at each and every indicator, because there might be people who are, say, who are deprived in 7 out of these 10 indicators, and the level of their deprivation, on the basis of which they will map the poor below this poverty line, that this is the level of their poverty, this is how poor a poor person is. So it takes care of the intensity of poverty as well, which was not taken care of by your traditional poverty line. And that is where I was saying that it also takes in account the relative deprivation between the poor. Now, there can be other problems. One problem is there could have been more indicators. Then also, if you look at these indicators, they are slightly different, right? There are input indicators here. Can you identify any of the input indicator here? We were saying that from input we have to move towards outcome. We have to move towards outcome, but we see that we still have input indicators here. Can you suggest an input indicator here? Nutrition. Nutrition is again an input. Similarly, the cooking fuel that you use is an input. Also you'll find output indicators here as well. Output can be years of schooling. Output can be school attendance. Then similarly, you'll find a few factors which do not change with time. Can you identify a factor which do not change with time? Because if you go conduct a survey after 2 years, that indicator would not have changed. That indicator would not have changed. No, asset might change. Asset might change, right? You might have a phone today, tomorrow you might not have it, or you might have say better phone. So it will take care of that aspect. So great. So someone had suggested child mortality. Now, if a child has died in the family, that indicator is going to remain the same. Even if you conduct this survey 2 years later, it would not matter how better the family is doing, whether they are able to take care of their health indicator or not. Similarly, housing can change, living standards can change within 2 years. So if you see that out of these indicators, you have different indicators different. Yeah, sanitation can change, right? Sanitation can change. Out of this, you find input indicators, you find output indicators, you find your indicators which do not change with time. Then you find indicators which change with time. All these indicators put in one place. So there is no congruence or coherence with respect to these indicators. So first idea was that why don't we consider other indicators? Then second idea is, why is there no coherence amongst these indicators? Then just look at the third idea. Just think of other problem related to these indicators. Okay, let me clear this. Even though I've given this in the slide ahead. Okay, so the slide says that it has both outputs such as years of schooling and inputs such as cooking fuel, as well as stock indicators. Stock indicators are the ones which do not change with time. And then there are flow indicators which change with time. So you do not have to go into the strict categorization. Even if you write simply that there are indicators which do not change with time and you mention those, then there are indicators which change with time, that will also do. Now just coming back to it, think about outcome. So we were saying input, giving money or say having sufficient income can be input. Then going to school can be output, right? I hope we are clear till here. We are on the same page till here. Having sufficient income to send someone to school, input. Going to school, output. What about the outcome? What about the outcome? What will be outcome of going to school? Why are you going to school? So you think of outcome more in terms of the level of learning outcomes. Whether if you are studying in 10th standard, you should have the basic minimum standard of a person who is studying in 10th standard. Yes, so basic indicators of knowledge and learning or your learning outcomes. But do you think we have any of the factors related to outcomes? And the answer is no. And another question is, so we are writing on white, that's why we are using red. I don't think any other color would be better for that matter. Now, if you look at these factors, you do not find any factor based in outcome. Even though when we proposed this multidimensional poverty index, we were saying that it has to do more with capability, it has to do more with choices, it has more to do with outcome, but we do not find outcome indicators here. So one argument in the favor of this is that we do not have say sufficient data to capture the outcomes. We do not have sufficient data to capture the outcomes of everything. Then just think about, now this data is related to households. How about the disparity within the family? Does this capture disparities within the family? So let me do one thing. Let me use a yellow pen and let me use it here. So it does not capture the intra-family differences. It does not capture if the family has an income of 100 or if the family has so and so resources, whether there is equitable distribution of resources on the basis of gender or not, whether the elderly are being taken care of or not, right? So it does not take care of intra-family differences. Then it does not account for differences in the level of poverty. So we were saying that yes, it will capture the intensity of poverty. It will definitely capture the intensity of poverty, but it would not reflect on the level. Similarly, what is the basis for choice of these indicators, the weightage given to these indicators? Someone had questioned that why education has been given more weightage compared to clean drinking water. Why has education been given more weightage compared to clean drinking water? And it is a very general question, right? That clean drinking water is something that comes before anything else. So you should have, if you think of basic standards, you would say that it should be or rather it should be, say, basic your drinking water, having nutritional requirements covered, etc., should get more weightage. But also if you look at it, you find that these indicators, one is drinking water is getting less weightage and education is getting more weightage on the basis of global consensus, that how globally what is being valued more. And also you'll find when we come to the Indian index, when we come to the national multidimensional poverty index, if you look at the deprivation in each of these factors, you'll find the answer for this weightage. But again, what is the weightage of these indicators, which all indicators have been chosen, is also under question. So which can basically work as your critical analysis of this multidimensional poverty index. Okay, so Vaishnav is asking, but can't death of children born later add to child mortality? See, child mortality is about child death. That is clear, that the number of children who have died within that household. Now, if a child has died in the year 2020, and after 2020, surprisingly, the family starts doing well, and you find that the survey was again conducted in 22, they will again mention them as deprived in the factor or in the indicator of child mortality. That is what the question is. Okay, so Harshita is saying that why, like now we have midday meal schemes, etc., but you still find people deprived of these indicators. You still find people deprived in these indicators. That is why you find these mentioned, because yes, we provide free education, we provide midday meal schemes, right? We take care of health through our public infrastructure, but that is not sufficient. Then the question is that why still you have a lot of people who are deprived? And again, yes, if you look at the criticism, you find that mentioned here. What is the basis of choice of of the weightage given to each indicator? And also the most important part is that the data that is being used is actually coming from your sample surveys. Now the size of these sample surveys is very less, which does not give us a clear picture, of the status of poverty in our country. So see, the ones who are still talking about education and drinking water, that's why we have mentioned it in criticisms, right? So we do not know the exact idea behind the choice of weightage for these indicators. Ultimately, these are based in your Millennium Development Goals. These are in line with your Sustainable Development Goals, which we have to say take care of till 2030. But ultimately, these were the indicators. This was what came out of global consensus. So, right. Yeah, see, okay, let me clear one more thing. This is my bad, that we did not talk about this. Zamesh is saying that if the child died in 2020, why would it again be counted? Because we are not counting the number of children who have died. We are just looking at whether a person is deprived in each of these indicators or not. We just have to look whether a person or a household is deprived in any of these indicators or not. So if you look at these indicators, child mortality says if any child has died in the family. Similarly, if you look at nutrition, if any adult or child in the family is malnourished, and they also classify the age, right? So when it comes to nutrition, it captures the nutrition of children and adults. So for male, it is a different age group, I believe 19 to 59, that you do not have to remember. For female, it is a different age group, starting 15, I believe. Then for children, it is different age group. So if any of the person within the family is deprived in these indicators, they are considered to be deprived in that particular indicator. So think of this, if within a family, if the mother and the father are healthy, but the child is malnourished, they will be considered deprived in this indicator, which is again problematic, because why just one individual being deprived when we are saying the level of difference? Why, if only one individual within that family is deprived in a particular indicator, why do we have to consider the entire household as deprived? And that was our last criticism that we had discussed. Then if you think of education, if no household member has completed 5 years of schooling. Similarly, when it comes to attendance, if any school age child is not attending school up to class 8. And also when we come to national multidimensional poverty index, they will make slight changes in this. They'll make slight changes in these say ideas of deprivation as well. That is all well documented there, mentioned there. Similarly, if you look at standard of living, if no electricity, poor. If not getting clean drinking water, poor. Not having proper sanitation facility, poor. If the floor is made out of sand, dirt or dunk, they are considered poor. If they are not using clean cooking fuel like LPG, PNG, they are considered poor. Similarly, poor if they do not own more than one of these assets. And on this line, someone had suggested that they are poor because they only have a cell phone. They only have a cell phone and they do not own anything like a radio, TV, bike or motorbike. But again, it is not for an individual. It is meant for a household. So I believe you must have at least some of these assets in your family, in your household, within your household. And also the idea of assets, that why these assets? Because if you look at the assets, they will range, they'll be different from society to society. Think about this. Person living in a remote area, what person living in a remote area, and they considered the poorest of the poor. If a person is living in a remote area and they do not own any of these assets, the chances are they will stay deprived for life, because they would not have, say, any means or any say any means of transport to travel from one place to another, because there won't be any buses, etc., in remote areas. And if they do not have a bicycle, they cannot go out for work. Similarly, if they do not have radio, television or any form of media, they would lack awareness, because they would not be aware of various government programs that are happening. They would not be aware of basic needs that need to be taken care of. They would not be aware of family planning, etc. So on the basis of which these assets have been defined. Now, we do not have to go into the details of why and which indicator. We just have to get an overview. We do not have to get into the complete methodology, because this has taken years. It has been developed after years and years of research, right? Because also you can simply question, we are not going to measurement, but you can simply question that these, if you look at these factors, are they coming from the same sample survey, or are they coming from the same census report or not? Because the chances are the data for these factors might not be covered in the same sample survey. And if the sample size is different, how would you know? If the sample size is different, how would you know it is right or not, whether there is coherence or not? So we just have to have enough points from our GS point of view to criticize this problem, to criticize this multidimensional poverty index. But the idea is that this is the best we had so far. This is the best we had so far. Otherwise, we were just looking at the levels of income, or or whether the person has been able to take care of their nutrition requirement or not. So this has been the most comprehensive, most detailed indicator so far. Before we move on to our next part, which is your National Multidimensional Poverty Index, let's take a break and start our discussion after the break. Just try to absorb the idea that has been given so far, and let me know if you have any questions from there. And if it is just a matter of repetition, it is better during revision you just go through that part of the video again, because it is recorded, available on the app, and that would do. Okay, so just absorb this idea of multidimensional poverty, and we will meet after the break. Okay, so see, the global MPI is dependent on the data coming from various nations. So in case of India, it is basically data from your NFHS, the survey that we have used data from or references from while discussing women and other aspects. So National Family and Health Survey provides the basic data for measurement of multidimensional poverty index. What does intra-family difference meant? So think of this, within a family, we were saying that all this data is being used to measure poverty within households. A household will be considered poor if people do not get sufficient nutrition. A household will be considered poor if they do not have clean cooking fuel. But if you remember our discussion on women, you find that there is a lot of gender inequality that prevails in our society, and that gender inequality starts from within the household. And this multidimensional poverty index does not capture any kind of intra-family differences, because basically the family members, if you look at family members, say nutrition levels, it might be the case that it is only the female members of the family who are undernourished or malnourished. But this data would say, if you look at the data, it would say that it is the household which is poor, rather than saying that it is this member of the household, or this is the female member or male member of the household who's poor or who is not getting enough nutrition, but the entire household. That is what is meant by intra-family differences. Okay, so I hope you have absorbed the idea of multidimensional poverty index, that they are talking primarily about three dimensions. One is health, other one is education, and the third one is living standard. Why not others? Because we do not have data for those. What is the choice of weightage and the choice of indicators? Under question. Where is the data coming from? Sample survey can be questioned. Similarly, does not measure intra-family differences. So these were the basic limitations of multidimensional poverty index. Those limitations can be extended to national multidimensional poverty index. Now, when we said that it is the capability approach of Amartya Sen on the basis of which your OPHI has developed this multidimensional poverty index, wherein they calculate the multidimensional poverty which is prevailing in various countries. Now, on the national level, countries have a flexibility because they have to measure their own poverty. Now, rather than using the traditional income line or the line of nutritional requirement, various countries are now following the same lines of multidimensional poverty. In this regard, Niti Aayog in India has developed a framework called National Multidimensional Poverty Index. That one was on a global level. This one is nation specific. So they are using the same dimensions. Here, if you look at it, health, education, standard of living, but they have made a few tweaks. When they have made a few tweaks or few changes to the indicators. In the global multidimensional poverty index, you had 10 indicators, but here you will find 12 indicators. They have added maternal health and they have added bank account to the list of these indicators. This has been developed by Niti Aayog, and you see that recently it has been in news. It has been in news that India has been doing fairly well. If you look at 2015-16, that was your NFHS 4. And if you look at 2019-21, that is your NFHS 5, India has made a lot of progress when it comes to tackling with the menace of poverty. Now look at these indicators. All the indicators are same apart from these two. And also, with the addition of these two indicators, the overall weightage or the specific weightage to these indicators have changed. If you look at this standard of living dimension, which gets 1/3, out of this 1/3, it was divided equally amongst 6 indicators, which were these in the global multidimensional poverty index. But now you see there are 7. So they have divided it equally among these 7 indicators. So every indicator gets 1 by 21 each. Now again, you can question that why bank account? Can anyone has an answer? Can anyone answer the question that why did we add bank account? Maternal health is fairly understandable. That why just look at child health? Why not look at maternal health as well? So one, it reflects on availability of credit, great, financial inclusion. Then another idea is, if you have a bank account, because if you look at the bank account, Jan Dhan Yojana, as part of Jan Dhan Yojana, it is one, financial inclusion, availability of credits, but the primary idea is that if you have a bank account is a reflection on the savings within a family. Now, which are the families who can save, who have enough surplus? After covering their basic needs, if you have enough surplus, that is the money, that is the amount you will save, of which bank account is a good indicator, good reflector. But again, you can question it, saying that why don't then we look at the amount of savings that these people have in the banks? Why just bank account? But the thing is, we have data available for this. And also, if you look at these indicators, now with the addition of bank account and maternal health, you can find, and you can simply start thinking about various government interventions. And you will get your answer that how India has done wonderfully well in the past 5 years. Right? So we have specific schemes targeting opening up of bank accounts for people. We have specific schemes targeting clean cooking fuel. Are these schemes coming to your mind or not? Is the Ujjwala Yojana coming to your mind or not? Is your PM Jan Dhan Yojana coming to your mind or not? So now if you look at it, when it was only income-based indicator, only income-based indicators, you had no idea which part to target. But now with this multidimensional index, you know exact indicators which need to be targeted. Working on these indicators, we can reduce the incidence of poverty in a country. And this is something that you see. Think of sanitation. Think of creation of toilets. Think of clean drinking water. Think of Jal Jeevan. So you have various schemes targeting these. Now again, the question remains, where is learning outcome? The question remains, what about other indicators? And yes, it can be used as a criticism, but we do not have answers for everything. So if you look at the weightage now, it has changed in standard of living, but it will remain the same in education. Look at this, because there are two indicators given equal weightage. Then similarly, in health, if you look, you find that nutrition has been given more importance compared to the other two indicators. And that's why you find the weightage of child mortality and maternal mortality or maternal health being 1 by 12, 1 by 12, and nutrition getting 1 by 6. So rather than dividing this 1 by 3 equally amongst these three indicators, more weightage has been given to nutrition for that matter. Now, there have been a few changes with respect to these indicators as well. How do they measure these changes? Now, look at this. Now, this is a list. If you look at it once, if you read it once, go through it once, you will definitely remember most of it, at least 90% of it. So I need not go through each and every indicator because it will be mere reading from this document. So a household is considered deprived if you look at any child or adolescent under the 18 years of age has died in the family in the past 5 years. Similarly, when it comes to maternal health, they talk about the antenatal care during your pregnancy, whether they had at least four antenatal care visits or not. Then the birth that has taken place, whether they got any assistance from any trained medical personnel or not. Now, it is not, say, strictly institutional. if there is someone, any trained medical professional who came to their house to assess that pregnancy or assess that delivery, that is also sufficient condition. Rest of the things remain the same. Rest of things remains the same apart from years of schooling. There, if you remember, the years of schooling was 5 years. Here they have made it 6 years. Here they have made it 6 years of schooling rather than 5 years. So yes, there have been a few changes. The weightage has changed. They have added 2 indicators. They have made a few changes in these indicators as well. Now here, if you see, even in the list of assets, you'll find changes for that matter. Why? Because we are now trying to adjust it to our national requirements, national needs. There it was global, so it had to be universal. Now it is more adapted to the specific needs of our nation. Now, if you look at the recent results or the report that was published, you find that we have done very well when it comes to addressing the problem of headcount ratio. You find that previously, from your NFHS 4 data, it was close to 25% of Indians who were living in multidimensional poverty. Now it has reduced to less than 15 or 14.96% using the NFHS 5 data. But again, you can still question the quality of data that is used, right? Because it is ultimately sample survey data. What will be a better measure? If we cover all these indicators, in your census 2021 and then come out with a report on the basis of that, that will be more say accurate compared to this NFHS data. So look at the number. Close to 13.5 crore people have exited multidimensional poverty between these years. Now these years, you just remember, I'll mention it for future, and these numbers are coming from NFHS 4 and NFHS 5, because you can simply ask a question, why these years? Why not any other year? The simple idea is the data is coming from NFHS 4 and 5. Then if you think of all the indicators, you find that if you look at NFHS 4 data and 5 data, we have done well in each of the indicator. Think of the number of people who have exited multidimensional poverty because of these indicators. Everywhere there is a decline. Look at this. But the steepest decline will come from your schemes. Ujjwala Yojana. It will come from creating toilets. It will come from providing electricity. It will come from opening bank accounts. So if you look at those schemes now, yes, they can be considered to be, say, populist measures to woo people. But thinking about a multidimensional poverty index, you can figure out that they are actually in the right direction. Yes, you can still question the outcome part. You can still question that, yes, you have opened a bank account. What about the savings? What about the availability of credit? Yes, you are providing right to education. But what about the learning outcomes? You are providing them with a gas cylinder. But what about refilling that cylinder? And you find these criticisms related to these schemes in the newspaper. But you remember that when it comes to policy making, it is done by your policy makers. It is done with the help of your think tanks, and those the methods that they're using can be used for political gains. There is no denying that fact. But ultimately, you find that they are working in the right direction. So all the indicators, we have been faring well. We have shown improvement. Then also, if you look at rural areas, just think of the change. Just think of the people who have exited the multidimensional poverty. So 32.59 to only 19% of the people living in rural areas now are multidimensionally poor. Similarly, in urban areas, there also has been a decline. Now, there can be multiple factors of the steep decline in rural areas. So you can think of the policies working in the right direction. the policy is working for the rural poor, for that matter. Then also think of the base effect. Think of the number of people who are living in rural areas. Think of the number of people who are living in these states. The states where you find the steepest decline in multidimensional poverty are the states with high population, are the states with highest number of poor people. So yes, obviously there is going to be a steep decline. Then the intensity of poverty has also reduced, but not to a great extent. If you remember the intensity of poverty, that how poor someone is or how deprived in all these indicators someone is, you find that there is a decline, but it is not very steep. Why? Because you find that our schemes, our policies have been targeted, taking care of a few indicators, and you'll see that and if you see that why Ujjwala Yojana, that most of the people were deprived in this indicator. Why toilets? Most of the people were deprived in this indicator. So because of which you find that there has been a decline in overall poverty, but the intensity of poverty has not reduced much. So improvement in nutrition, years of schooling, sanitation and cooking have played a significant role in reducing the overall MPI value. Now again, you do not have to go through the everything, you do not have to remember everything, just remember the basics, that how much it has reduced now in rural areas and urban areas, how the intensity of poverty has changed. But if you look at intensity of poverty, it has not changed much. It has not changed much. Now, this is basically the reply of government, or this is basically coming from Niti Aayog, that it is because of various policies of the government that we have recorded this steep decline in indicators of multidimensional poverty, and they have mentioned various schemes. So if a question is asked about the recent national multidimensional poverty index, that how India has done, so you have all the answers here. You can use these factors to show the changes, that it has changed in every indicator. We have recorded a decline in every indicator. Then it has changed more, or it has we have elevated more people from the rural areas compared to urban areas. The intensity has changed so much, etc. And also, if they extend that question to asking what actually led to this decline, you can simply think of the various government schemes that have led to this decline. So if a question is asked, because they cannot ask a specific question that what led to the reduction in MDP, but they can definitely ask a question that what has changed. If I ask you this question, what has changed? Why were we not able to reduce poverty to this extent previously? Why were we not able to reduce poverty to this extent previously? So the first idea that you think of is, previously we were only targeting income, and we were thinking of, say, taking up various say unemployment or employment guarantee programs. We were thinking of providing nutrition, but now we have more specific targets which can be achieved. And if we take up those indicators, if we target those indicators, the simple answer is yes, we will record a better decline. So yes, because it was not multidimensional previously. Now we cannot say Make in India, because see, most of these indicators, yes, they do reflect the levels of income of a family, but they are not, say, they're not coming directly from there. So let's stay away from Make in India for that matter. We can just definitely cite it as an answer, because it is ultimately will help. Make in India will help in generating more income, but let's stick to the specific answer. So yes, now schemes are more inclusive, then we have specific schemes. Great. So let's give this credit to the government. Let's give this credit to the government completely, wherein they have been able to target various dimensions of poverty. Now, if we see that we are still poor, we still have a lot of population of poor in our country, what can be various remedies and government interventions? Now, just look at these factors. The simple idea is, apart from employment generation, you can just think of various interventions in all these aspects, that how government has intervened. And if you have any suggestions from those schemes, you can use them as suggestions to make it even better. Yes, so definitely you can think of the various awareness campaigns that have been run. So the progress of, or the basically the better implementation of these schemes, various pointers related to better implementation of these schemes working in these directions or dimensions can simply be quoted as your answer. Now, with this, I hope you have understood this. Now, the possibility of question from MDPI is from your NMDPI, that is your National Multidimensional Poverty Index. You can extend the same lines of argument or the same critical analysis that we have done to Multidimensional Poverty Index to your National Multidimensional Poverty Index. If they ask a question about how things have changed, you have the answer. If they think about what led to this change, you have the answer. What could have been done better, you also have the answer. So any question coming from this direction, this dimension, can be more or less targeted, can be answered. And you never know, if they ask, say, a question out of the box, that is something that you would have to see during the examination. Now let's think about poverty, its causes and consequences. Now, we have already looked at multiple dimensions of poverty. We have thought of poverty in terms of health, in terms of education, in terms of levels of income, in terms of employment, in terms of pure availability of credit, in terms of political power, etc. Now, what you have to do here is, you have to understand all these causes of poverty can simply become consequences of poverty as well. All these causes of poverty can also become consequences of poverty as well. So the way we dealt with nutrition, the way we dealt with population, you can extend that argument, or you can extend the same say reasoning to various other causes as well. And now when we think of your vicious cycle of poverty, it basically says that the factors of poverty become the consequences of poverty. The causes of poverty become the consequences of poverty. That is what your vicious cycle means. So you understand this vicious cycle. We'll take up 2-3. We have already taken population and nutrition. Let's take up a couple more dimensions, show you this vicious cycle. Then you have to use the same arguments to understand how any factor can become a cause and consequence of poverty. Why do we have to do that? Because already they have asked multiple questions on this vicious cycle of poverty, but indirectly. You would not know. Yes, the ones who have understood the concept well would know that, yes, this is a question coming from vicious cycle of poverty. So it is better to be prepared with every dimension. Just look at this vicious cycle. If a household is poor, they would not have clean water. If they do not have clean water, they are more vulnerable to diseases. Their body would not be able to absorb proper nutrition. They'll have low energy. They would not be able to work properly, and they will have ultimately low productivity. With this low productivity, they would not get a good job, or they would not get say profitable employment, which will lead to a lower income. If they have lower income, one is, yes, they'll definitely lose their self-confidence. And this is something that we will discuss with psychological dimension. And you see that generally people who do not have good income, people who are poor, they stay isolated from rest of the society. They do not know what is happening around. they can just limit their understanding to their own problems. They would not be able to come up with innovative solutions. Now, if they do not have control over themselves, one is with low income, you already become a poor household, but also with low income, you'll find low levels of awareness. They might end up giving birth to more number of children. They might engage the children of the family in any kind of work, in any kind of labor. If the children are going for child labor, they would not be able to, say, prosper in life in the future with no education, no skills, and they'll still remain poor. So similarly, this kind of vicious cycle can be extended to various other causes and consequences of poverty. Now let's look at these one by one. One thing is, we will create this vicious cycle for a few so that you understand even better, but then you have to say, deal with the various factors yourself, because otherwise it will become a very monotonous exercise. Now think of fiscal deficit. If there is fiscal deficit, government would not be able to invest in social security of the people. If they are not able to invest in health, education, people will stay. People would not get a good job. People will stay with low productivity. Now, if there are less and less number of people who are productive, there are less and less number of people who are contributing to the national income, ultimately, the fiscal deficit will still remain. Similarly, think of inflation. Think of a poor household. They do not have sufficient income. Add inflation to that. If there is inflation, they would not be able to take care of their basic necessities. Why? Because everything is expensive. They will not be able to purchase nutritious food. They will not be able to afford medical health care. If they do not do that, their health suffers. If their health suffers, they would not get a job. The income levels will be low. If the income levels are low, they'll still remain poor. They would not be able to adjust it to your inflation. Lack of access to basic infrastructure. Now, this is also, if you look at these factors, they are going to affect other factors as well. So if the government has a fiscal deficit, they would not be able to invest in basic infrastructure for people, ultimately leading people to become poor. Similarly, if this government has fiscal deficit, you find low productivity there, that people would not be able to take care of their basic necessities, hence they would not be that productive. If they are not that productive, there is a supply side constraint. I hope you are getting it. There'll be a supply side constraint. If there is a supply side constraint, it will lead to inflation. It will lead to inflation because the availability of commodities or basic necessities or products is less, but there are more people who demand it. So ultimately leading to inflation. Now, in inflation, what happens? If we think about it, when, say, the prices of tomatoes were rising, when the prices of basic pulses, etc., are on the rise, we find that if you're coming from middle class or, say, upper middle class, you still be able to adapt to those things, because ultimately your income will increase over the years. Your income will increase over the years, and your income will get adjusted to that inflation. But think of someone who's working in a dead-end job. Think of a daily wage laborer. Their income levels remain the same for many years to come, and their income is ultimately not adjusted to inflation. Yes, you'll find there's a rise in, say, 100, 150 rupees after 10, 15 years, but generally it remains the same. And ultimately, they are the ones who get adversely affected. Why? Because they would not be able to take care of their basic nutrition. Because pulses equivalent to nutrition, they are not able to take it. That will ultimately lead to suffering related to their health, etc. Now, you are saying that when it comes to inflation, generally inflation is followed by growth. But we are here looking at, if you look at the society at large or the nation at large, yes, with growth, with rising purchasing power of people, inflation will increase because the overall society is developing. But you think of the poorer sections. That's why I was giving this example. Think of the poorer sections whose income levels are not increasing, who do not have, say, stable income throughout the year. They are seasonal laborers. They do not have any kind of job security. How would that development affect them? And this is something that we are going to take up in the future as well. Do not worry about it. It is going to be a question to you. Yes, so the growth is limited to a fewer hands. And here, if I raise a question and I say that poverty is an outcome of development, just keep this in your mind. We will discuss this. Poverty as an outcome of development, and you will get your answer. Now, uneven rate of development in India. So think of various regions. We have a lot of disparity when it comes to development across regions. Think of your urbanized India and then think of your remotest rural parts of the country. And you find that there's a huge gap in development, and ultimately there's a huge gap in poverty as well. And that is the base effect I was talking about. If you look at the rural areas, the number of people living there are more compared to urban areas. The number of poor out of those people are more living on those rural areas. And ultimately, underdevelopment of these regions become a cause for their poverty because they would not have any opportunities for work. They would not have any opportunities for education. Just think of a simple role of bicycle in providing education. Simple role of bicycle. And I think we have discussed this previously with role of women. So a person, if they have to access education, they would need to go to that place. If they're living in remote areas and they have to attend the school, say in the next village or somewhere, this lack of means of transportation becomes an obstacle in getting that education. This lack of means of transport becomes an obstacle in reaching your workplace. And you'll find, and if even in the cities, you'll find that a lot of daily wage laborers you'll find going in tractors to construction sites. So what they do is they'll reach one area, they will, say, gather around one of the most important circles in the city, and from there people from various construction sites will take them in their own transport. Now there is a possibility that if they had a better means of transport available to them or a public transport available to them, they could have traveled to some other place for better wages. But now they have to stick to this particular work, stick to this particular labor, even though it is not better in terms of remuneration. Then you think of commercialization of agriculture. Can anyone suggest that how commercialization of agriculture would lead to impoverishment of people? Because one idea is, if we commercialize agriculture, if we, say, if we develop agriculture, if we use modern equipment, it will ultimately lead to increased productivity in agriculture. It will ultimately lead to an increased productivity in agriculture. Now, see, reduction in food grains would not follow from here. Why? Because productivity is increasing. Productivity has increased. Yes, so reduced labor requirements, right? With modernization of agriculture, the landless laborers who used to work, where do they go now? They do not have any other skill set. They do not have a land of their own. Where do they get engaged now? So this commercialization and modernization of agriculture can ultimately lead to impoverishment of the masses. Then you think of various black marketing practices, the role of middlemen. So there is a poor farmer, he has a small piece of land on which they are doing agriculture. The entire family is engaged in agriculture. Now the middlemen, to extract maximum profit out of them, they will offer very low prices, because these poor farmers would not have transportation facilities to take their grains or to take their crops to, say, nearby urban areas where they can sell it better. And they would be dependent on these middlemen. They would not have a place to store their crops. Say they have something which has a very low shelf life. Think of tomatoes. Now they would not have, say, storage facilities to keep those tomatoes, and they would want, once they are cultivated, they would want to just sell it right away to the first person who comes across. Why? Because they do not have means of transportation to take it elsewhere, plus they do not have storage facilities, and the shelf life is low. So they will be dependent on these middlemen. And also, generally, you find in villages, if anyone is from rural background, you'll find that these middlemen are generally the ones who actually avail credit to them. These money lenders are the middlemen. And they say that, okay, I'll give you credit. The rate of interest will be 5 to 10% per month. Plus, you would have to give your produce to me at this and this price. So this dual exploitation of the farmers can lead to their impoverishment. So ultimately, because of these practices, agriculture will not be profitable. It might lead to farmer suicides. It might lead to decreasing relevance of agriculture, that people would not, and now you see that more and more number of people are not depending on agriculture. They are taking to ulterior means of income, or to alternative means of income. You think of the rural youth now, you'll find that most of them do not engage in agriculture. They go around looking for other kinds of job. Why? Because agriculture is not that profitable anymore. At least for the smaller farmers, at least for the farmers with very less land holding, ultimately because of the role of the middleman. Then if they are not skilled, if they are not provided education, they would not ultimately be employed and remain poor. So these can be a few, say, economic factors which lead to impoverishment or which lead to poverty. But also these factors are consequences of poverty as well. If a household is poor, they would not be able to provide for the education and skilling of the younger ones. Now, if these younger ones are not skilled, not provided education, they would not get a gainful employment, and ultimately the household will remain poor. And with this you see, and we are going to cover other factors as well, with this you see that once you get into that cycle of poverty, you would not be able to come out. Without any kind of intervention, it will become next to impossible. It will become next to impossible to come out of that vicious cycle. And that's why it is called vicious. Entering that cycle, yes, you can. With a simple health-related emergency in your family, with a natural disaster, you can land in that cycle, but it will become difficult for you to come out of that cycle without intervention. And that is what the cause and effect relationship shows. Now think of the various political causes of poverty. Think of governments not being, say, efficient, not being able to get enough revenue. If they do not have enough revenue, they would not be able to spend on basic infrastructure. It will lead to low budgetary allocation for these in this basic infrastructure, and ultimately people would not be able to come out of poverty. Now this low budgetary allocation might not only be a direct result of lack of availability of resources. It can also come from misplaced priorities of the governments. The governments can have misplaced priority. So they might go for investing a lot in other kind of infrastructure rather than developing the basic infrastructure. So you can get these examples from any government across the globe, because the priorities have always been misplaced. But please do not use an example from your own country, because we find this happening in our country as well. But please do not use example from our own country. Maybe use it from past, or maybe use it from some other country. Then there can be lack of political will. So the way we are saying misplaced priorities, that is basically a part of lack of political will. So the people want X, but the government is giving Y. Why the government can be authoritarian? Why the government can easily can easily keep people away from demanding their rights, keep people away because these people who do not have any kind of awareness, it is easy to keep them involved in various communal issues, etc., that do not impact them directly, putting the blame on someone else, on the other community, rather than addressing their requirement for basic things or basic necessities of life. Then corruption in your system can also lead to poverty. And you see that's how it can be. There can be various examples of corruption, how it can lead to poverty. Lack of sense of responsibility of the government. Now, this lack of sense of responsibility can also be on the part of your stakeholders. If the people themselves do not want development, if the people themselves do not want to come out of the poverty line or to come out of poverty, the government, basically the political will reflects the social will. This is the idea. The political will reflects the social will. Our policies or anything, any programs, schemes of the government will reflect the social will of the society, that what is it that people want. Our media also reflects the will of the society. So it is easier sitting at homes and simply crying foul about the role of media, the negative role of media, that how media goes on perpetuating different kind of ideas that have no relevance, that have no factual backing, but ultimately they reflect what the society at large wills. It is ultimately the will of the society that is reflected in the role of media, in the role of your politics. So people, if they themselves are not aware, if they themselves do not participate, they do not have a sense of responsibility for themselves, then the government will go on doing whatever it wants. Then you think of the idea of neocolonialism. Now, do not get confused. When you think of colonialism, the basic idea was that the mother country was taking direct control of another country, of another nation, and exploiting their resources for their benefits. It can be economic benefit, it can be for geopolitical reasons, for strategic reasons, that they want to create a base to say counter another country, right? So in case of Anglo-French rivalry, you have seen that very well. So one idea was that the Britishers wanted to exploit the Indian resources and gain economically out of it. Another idea was that the Anglo-French rivalry, rather than being restricted to Europe, was being carried out across the globe in these colonies. So the reasons can be anything, but the basic idea is that there is direct control of policies and resources of those nations. But is that direct control possible in the modern world? And the answer is no. Why? Because now we have various organizations. We have the entire various global organizations, and most of the countries will come together to fight against it. Yes, you still find instances of direct control over other territories. You think of Russia-Ukraine war. Rather than being a war, it is basically Russian invasion of Ukraine. Similarly, you can think of China, how they have been exploiting the Tibetan region and Tibetan people. Yes, there are few instances, but generally taking direct control of another territory becomes a human right violation, and that is something no country wants to get into because of globalization, because of integrated markets. Now, you think of neocolonialism. If you cannot take direct control, why not take indirect control? Why not invest so much in their economy that if you take out that money, the entire economy will collapse? The Chinese model. When you think of neocolonialism, it is basically limited to the erstwhile colonizers. So the idea of neocolonialism says that yes, think of Britishers, that yes, the Britishers left Asia and Africa. They freed the colonies. So there is no direct control of Britishers, but in the form of various economic treaties, in the form of various economic relations and political relations with these countries, these colonizers still have direct influence over various policies. But we do not have to limit that argument till the erstwhile colonizers, because we see that it is being done by China. Now, China itself being a colony, Chinese were not the colonizers, they were the colonies, but they are also performing this act. So the idea of neocolonialism says that bigger countries or more powerful countries exercising indirect control over the policies, over the markets of smaller countries. This is neocolonialism. But what happens with this? Just think of your flaws or negatives of globalization. With your MNCs, bigger companies coming in, establishing their bases in these countries, developing and underdeveloped countries, and simply wiping away all the competition that was there in the market. So in that competition, your local manufacturers, your local laborers, everyone will get washed away. Because now they will bring in technology. They will not need a lot of labor. So where does that labor go? Now that labor which was working in your cottage industries, which were working in your local industries, they also do not have a job. Why? Because they push them out of business. This is the direct impact of colonialism on poverty. Apart from this, the idea of political impact on poverty does not stop here. So it can be about malpractices in administration. It can be about misplaced priorities of the government. It can also be about authoritarian regimes. Now, if there is say a nation, if the government is biased towards a particular community, they will make sure that the other community does not grow. So any kind of say biasness in the government, any kind of authoritarianism that the government has decided that they are going to benefit the businesses and they are not ready to invest at all in social sector, which can be done. And you have examples of authoritarian governments as well. Shweta, you are asking whether the debt policy of China isn't a direct reflection of control. Now, see, they are not. That is the basic difference between colonialism and neocolonialism. For colonialism to happen, Britishers had to travel all the way to India. For neocolonialism to happen, you can stay in your country, invest so much in the other country, give them loans, etc., and without even stepping in that country once, you can still control the policies. Because ultimately, they would say that if we take our money back, what will happen to your economy? And the other government would say, then what do we do? Please make favorable policies for us. Please let us create, say, security base on this part of your in this part of your country, so that we can target other country or our competitor. So it is not direct control, but yes, they do have direct influence over the policies. Coming to the socio-cultural aspect, think of various types of social discriminations. Think of discrimination on the basis of caste, not letting people from certain caste work in any other profession. They have to take up a specific occupation. If you are, say, the so-called untouchable, you are limited to taking up that economic activity. Now, with this social discrimination, and that you can find in relation to gender, in relation to caste, in relation to various regional disparities, but also you find that this has an impact on keeping them in the vicious cycle, because this problem or this social discrimination carried out at one point of time will reflect in the generations to come. Why? Because if a family is restricted on the basis of caste, if the family is restricted from taking up certain types of occupation or higher remunerative occupations, they would remain poor. But now, tomorrow, they say that now you can take up any other occupation you want. Do you think they'll have the education or the awareness or the skill set to take up any other occupation? And again, looking at the data, the answer is no. It is only very few who make it out of that vicious cycle. And generation after generation, most of those people will remain where they were. And this reflects very well from your socio-economic caste census data. Right, if you remember with caste system, to show the overlap between class and caste, I had shared the data with you. Then various there can be prejudices on the basis of religion, caste, gender, etc., which can lead to impoverishment. So it is based in any kind of social discrimination. So when we are seeing that discrimination on the basis of gender, not letting people from a certain gender, that is women, work out of the household sphere, they're limited to the household sphere, not letting people from certain religious groups to take up another activity, right? So it can be political, but it can be social as well. Yes, it can be done by the government, it can be done by the society at large. Then the issue related to child labor. Child labor, now you would see that they are contributing directly to the family income, then how the household would remain poor? Now there is additional income, but you'll find that generally that income is not proportional. That income is not proportional to the basic requirements that that individual will have. So for example, if a family of 4 needs 100 rupees to say take care of everyone, and say one of the member gets 20 rupees, and they think of having another member in the family that will take the number to 5, but the nutritional requirement would not remain 100, it will go to 120, but the income will come up to only 100. So it would not be proportional. And also, if you think of child labor, you think of no skill set, no education. Would that occupation give them chances of mobility in the future? And the answer is again no. And you'll find them working in the same jobs with no adjustment of their income to inflation, with no promotion whatsoever. They will keep working at the same level. You think of the job of a mechanic. You would find a lot of children working at the mechanic's place. What do you think they get? Even in the cities, they barely get 5,000 to 7,000 rupees for month-long labor, and they get a hike in what, 4 to 5 years? Is that sufficient? The answer is no. So this child labor can also become a factor of impoverishment, if not today, but in the future. Similarly, your slums do not have clean drinking water, your slums do not have electricity, your slums do not have any basic facility that is required for a decent standard of living, which can ultimately lead to poverty. How it will affect your health, it will affect your levels of awareness, it will affect your levels of education, etc. Similarly, disintegration of family. Now, can someone suggest, because simple idea is it has to come from joint family. So when we think of family disintegration, how can it lead to poverty? Can someone cite an example? Can someone cite an example for the same? So one can be fragmentation of land. So if it was, say, 1 acre land that the entire family had, there were 3 children, they divided it equally. Now the output out of each share, 1/3 of that acre, is not going to be sufficient to take care of that individual family. Similarly, joint family worked as a cushion, as a security for the unproductive members of the family. But now with family disintegration, you find if you are unproductive, you have to remain poor because there is absolutely no one else to take care of you. Yes, so basically division of resources, fragmentation of land. It can also come out of property dispute. Great. Then you think of communalism and regionalism. So one, we were saying that poverty is a cause of communalism and regionalism, and also it is an effect of communalism and regionalism as well. How is it? The people think of violent conflicts that happen. Now, in those violent conflicts, there'll be a lot of poor people. If you take the recent case of Haryana, it was ultimately the poor who suffered. No one from the political class or no one from the groups that incited that hatred, that violence got affected. But it was the poor who got removed from that area. It was the poor who were not able to get any kind of work on the basis of their religion, on the basis of their caste. So ultimately, it is those people who get affected because of this issue. And if not just that, just think of poor laborers who travel all the way to different states to work, And because of the feeling of regionalism, people do not provide them with work. Because of the religion, people not providing them work. People not providing them, say, basic facilities. For example, if there is a construction laborer going all the way to Maharashtra from Bihar, yes, they might find a job, but because of that feeling of regionalism, because of that feeling of hatred, people would not even offer them water. People would not even take care of them in case of any kind of emergency, just because of that feeling. So one is the after effects of any kind of violent conflict, and other one is just the mere feeling of regionalism or mere feeling of communalism can impoverish you. Take the example of Uttarakhand. Recently, people who have been working there, people belonging to a certain religion who have been working there for years now, they have to leave everything behind and move to other areas. Then they would have to look for a new job, new work, new business to set up. So it can have, even without violent conflicts, it can have negative impact on people. Now, with this, we move to yes, you have a few other socio-cultural reasons which we have already looked into. High population growth and poverty. We have looked into a detailed. We have gone into detailed discussion with a question. Think of child marriage. Child marriage, how it impacts population growth, because ultimately it is your population growth which impacts your poverty. Then lack of family planning, coming from lack of awareness and education, illiteracy, etc. Ultimately, everything leading to poverty. Now, these are also factors related to population growth as well. Right. So this is something that we have discussed. Just give a quick thumbs up if we do not have to go through them again. Great. Because see, communalism and regionalism are social problems. Communalism and regionalism are social problems. The examples that we have given, aren't they coming from society? Isn't it the people who are leading to this problem? So that's how communalism and regionalism find a mention here. Yes, they can become a political problem as well, but mostly it is because of the conflicts that happen, the social conflicts that happen, the rights that happen. The government has a part to play because they are not intervening in time, they're not rehabilitating those people, they're not stopping these rights, but ultimately it is coming from society. Now think of environmental reasons. Now one idea is that if the environment, the quality of air is poor, it will directly impact your health and ultimately lead you to poverty, or ultimately keep you in the poverty cycle. Now think of these people, think of the people who have to live in these polluted areas. So one idea is pollution being a cause of poverty. Another thing is how pollution or how unclean environment is a effect of poverty. If you're poor, then you do not have sufficient resources, sufficient income to live in other areas, to live in better neighborhoods. You will be restricted to those areas, highly polluted areas. You would have to live around the industrial area. You would have to live in slums where you do not get any kind of clean environment, which will definitely affect your health and ultimately keep you poor. So environment also has a cause and effect relationship. Also think of your rural areas, because most of the examples of environment will come from rural areas, because you are suggesting about droughts, floods, etc. You are suggesting heat waves, because of which ultimately people would not be able to carry out their agricultural activities and remain poor. Similarly, think of land pollution, think of the excessive use of fertilizers, etc. Now one thing is that the poor farmers might not be able to purchase these fertilizers, but they see that the productivity is not rising. And because of this low productivity, because of these low productivity levels, they will go for credit. They will take credit from someone and they will purchase these fertilizers. Now with lack of awareness, they will use them as how they feel it is right. So yes, maybe in that year it might be say more productive. It might give them better income. They might be able to take care of the credit that they have taken as well. But over the years, in 3, 4, 5 years, the agricultural productivity will keep going lower and lower. Why? Because of the impact that it had on the land, it had on the soil. And this will become ultimately a reason for them to remain in that poverty cycle, because now even if they take credit, and they definitely will, because they'll think that the productivity is falling, they'll ask someone, they will go ask a shop person, and they'll say that, why don't you try this fertilizer? It is slightly expensive, but it'll give you a better yield. Now they would have to take credit for that again. They'll take credit for that, they'll purchase that, they'll use it, but ultimately the productivity of the land is going to remain low. Why? Because the land has been deteriorated over the years with the indiscriminate use of fertilizers. And with that, they would not be able to repay the credit. Plus, they would not be able to get better productivity out of their fields, out of their agricultural land, and hence remain poor. So these were various various factors that we generally see, various social, economic, and political factors which impact poverty, and in turn, poverty impacts them. So there is a cause and effect relationship. Now you think of psychological factors. One simple thing is that if you're poor, just think of yourself. You generally try to hang around with people who are from the same socioeconomic class, right? And generally it is not that you try to, but ultimately you will go to the kind of school where people from a similar background are coming, because it is ultimately dependent on the purchasing power, how much fees you can pay. You will have those kind of friends, and you will try to, or you will tend to remain in that socio-economic group. Similarly, if you think of poor, one, they are alienated by the society, that the society would not want to bring them closer. Yes, they think of the poor only in terms of utility, that yes, if we have poor in the society, we can take care of the menial jobs. We can take care of cleaning of our, say, homes. We can take care of our car cleaning. We can take care of our sewage cleaning, etc. So the only way we think of poor, the only way in which we think of poor is generally based in utility, that how they can be helpful. But otherwise, we generally alienate them from the society. And in turn, what happens is they also develop a mindset of remaining alienated. They also do not feel connected with other people, because think of it, the person who might be helping you clean your home and you yourself, there is a lot of difference in the views. You not say simply sit around and talk, because your demands from life, your expectations from life are different. Their expectations from life are different. You're thinking of clearing the civil services examination, they're thinking of their next square meal, right? So this process of deprivation, or the gap in income and the gap in demands, keeps them alienated. Then also, they do not have any kind of social security, and because of which they'll find themselves underconfident. They'll find themselves highly dependent on others, highly dependent on government to take care of their healthcare needs, highly dependent on their employer to take care of their income, because they'll think that if I do not do what the employer wishes me to do, they might ask me to leave the job. Yes, I might find another job, but it might take another week to find another job. And what do I do for 1 week? How do I take care of the needs of my family for that 1 week? And they will be ready to work at lower wages. They'll be ready to get exploited. They would not raise their voice against the employer, no matter how harsh the living conditions are. And if you look at people working in various restaurants, if you look at people working on construction sites, do you think they are in a position to negotiate their terms of employment? No, they are not, because if not them, they have other set of people. So because of this lack of social security, they have this feeling in their mind, they have this insecurity, they have this fear in mind, because of which they ultimately do not negotiate their terms and remain poor. Now, along with this, you look at this idea of culture of poverty uh, with due attention. Now, till now, we were saying that it is the society or it is the government, it is various government policies on which poverty is dependent. Because if the government is not taking the right step, if the government is not investing in public healthcare, if the government is not investing in public education, we cannot elevate poor people out of poverty. Similarly, if the society is depriving people of livelihood options, if society is not providing people with their basic rights, ultimately they'll remain poor. But now there is this different idea of culture of poverty. Now it basically shifts the responsibility of being poor on poor. And now, even though in academic terms, this is an exception, but we find this idea to be prevalent. And if you remember, I had asked you a question about merit and poverty, your socioeconomic level and poverty. So if I haven't, let me ask that question again. What do you think? Your merit is directly proportional to your hard work. Yes, that can be established. But is it only dependent on the hard work or your intelligence? Is your merit completely your own making? Is your merit completely your own making? Or is it dependent on other factors as well that are beyond your control? Because we believe in meritocracy, we are, writing this examination, and we believe that once we clear this examination, we are the bosses. We did it, we made it to the top, and we deserve everything. But yes, it is also dependent on other factors that are beyond your control. Just think of people who are not able to go to school after 10th standard because they have to take up labor. They might have more potential than the top ranker that we have in the previous 10 years, the top rankers we had. Then similarly, there are people who might not be able to sustain their preparation because of various socio-economic factors beyond 2 years. Then there can be people who can go on preparing for another 10 years. Why? Because they do not have to contribute to family income. There's no problem at all. So yes, and this is, it is very good to know that everyone has a fair idea about it, right? Everyone has a fair idea about it, that it is not completely your own making. But you find generally, whenever this question is being asked in any class, the question is, the answer is right opposite. And they believe that ultimately it is the poor who are responsible for their own poverty. It is the poor, their methods, their way of living, that is their own responsibility. So shifting the responsibility from the government, from the society, to the poor themselves. And they say that they think only about today. They do not think about future. If they get 100 rupees, they would rather invest it on food than education. Or they would invest it on something else than education, or maybe for their betterment. And recently I came across someone, and they were saying that if someone is living in the national capital region, if they're poor for their own reasons. They're poor, being poor is their own fault. Now, because you have so many options in the gig economy, etc. And I asked him a simple question, that do you believe that everyone would have a license to, say, drive a car, or everyone would have awareness of the gig economy that is working around? Just think about the poor living on the footpath, who are definitely below the poverty line. Would they have the option to take up any kind of other thing? No, they do not have any levels of skill. They do not have a good level of education. But this is one idea which says that that generally it is the poor who have a very narrow outlook. They cannot think beyond a point. They believe in living in the moment. They only care about instant gratification rather than future. But the counter argument is that ultimately it is not in their own hands. They have been forced to live like that. So this idea of culture of poverty should also be taken into account. Rather than say approaching it academically, we are just simply understanding the basic idea, because all the ideas so far were basically talking about various other factors impacting poverty. Now, poverty being a making of the poor, shifting the responsibility on the poor themselves, because this is a different idea compared to those. So it can just go through the definition, even though I have slightly modified the definition to make it look more balanced. So here I've written that poverty forces the poor to develop certain patterns of behavior, forces the poor. But otherwise, the culture of poverty is understood as it is the poor who have certain patterns of behavior, who have a very narrow outlook, who believe living in the moment, which is the reason for their poverty or impoverishment. Okay, yes, Anjali, you are right to a great extent when you say this, that no one would in their, say, right mind want to remain poor. But again, see, Bharti, when you say that, yes, a lot of beggars, etc., are part of mafia, but the mafia that the mafia that exists, they are not poor. Right? They are the ones who are exploiting the poor, who are exploiting the beggars, who are kidnapping children, people from various parts of the country, and pushing them in this profession. Right? It is not. And if you remember about prostitution, I was saying that it is not always because of trafficking. Yes, there are people who enter the profession of prostitution on their own, but that their will is not free, because there is subtle coercion. Why? Because they are socio-economically weaker compared to others, and they have to take care of their family, they have to take care of their basic requirements. And yes, it looks like they have entered with their own will, that they have, but ultimately there is a subtle coercion because of which they were forced to enter. Right? So this is the idea of various causes and effects of poverty. This is the question that we have discussed yesterday. We have discussed all the parts, how to break it down, how to structure it. The only part that was left was how population growth is not the only factor or cause of poverty. But with this detailed discussion on your vicious cycle of poverty, can you now answer this question? Can you now answer this question completely? Even though you could have definitely mentioned a few factors, but now you have a detailed list. Now, rather than talking about specific factors, you can talk about the general dimensions as well. There can be other political factors. Cite a few examples. Then there can be economic factors, so on and so forth. Right? So now you would have a better command over this part of the question as well. Now let's look at a few other considerations. Now I'll just run through them quickly. That poverty and the relationship between caste and class. You find, if you look at the numbers of poverty, you'll find that people coming from the so-called lower caste are more deprived compared to people coming from other castes. Right? This is something that I've already shown you with your data in the chapter on caste. Similarly, there is a difference in the levels of poverty, in the intensity of poverty, when you compare people coming from various social groups. And you will obviously find more intensity of poverty or more number of people who are poor when you think of your casual laborers, right? When you think of your agricultural laborers, because they do not own any asset, etc. Because there can be people who are salaried, but they do not have job security. But then there are people who do not have regular employment at all. Not having job security is one thing, that tomorrow they might ask you to leave. But not having regular employment is another. And generally you find these casual laborers, construction laborers, agricultural laborers, they have either seasonal employment or they do not know, because people who go and stand on a circle looking for work for that particular day, they have no guarantee whether they'll get work that day or not. After 9:30, they might have to go back, stay at home, stay hungry with their family, right? So there is difference, or say there are various differences in levels of poverty based on your class as well. Similarly, if you remember, we have already discussed the idea of poverty and crime. Generally, we assume that crime and poverty go hand in hand. That levels of crime will increase with the increasing levels of poverty. This is what is generally told. And if you remember the idea of poverty being a threat to everyone, what was the basic idea? That if people are poor, if their basic necessities are not covered, they will take to crime in the future. That is the idea. But there are various studies, and I think I had provided you the link for that paper as well, but you need not go through it. But yes, there are studies which show an inverse relationship. And overall, in general, if you see, the rates of crime are rising in a country, but at the same time, the rates of poverty or the levels of poverty are on a decline. So there is no direct relationship between poverty and crime as established in the society. So if you have to use this argument, somewhere, please always give both the dimensions, because this otherwise reflects poorly on your understanding, that you understand that it is directly related, right? Because other aspects can be overlooked, but say thinking of crime and a particular section of the society, be it based on caste, be it based on religion, be it based on class, is wrong, right? And we generally tend to do that. Then poverty and regional differences. Now with poverty, you'll find that the levels of poverty in different states are different. That is one idea. Then you think about the poverty levels in rural and urban areas. In urban areas, less poverty. In rural areas, more poverty. But the intensity of poverty is more in urban areas as well. So we do not have to think that urban areas are better off when it comes to poverty, that urban areas are better off. Because if you look at this, the intensity of poverty in urban areas also is very high. The number of poor might be less, but the intensity of poverty is still pretty high for that matter. So these were a few other considerations related to poverty. With this, what I would want you to take up is, do you have to learn this table? Absolutely no. You do not even have to remember any numbers or anything. Just have to remember the idea that poverty can have overlaps with caste, poverty can have overlaps with class or the levels of poverty. Similarly, poverty and crime might not always have, do not always have, say, direct relationship. Then similarly, when you think of regional differences, think of how the levels of poverty in every state is different. Then think of the differences between various areas, rural and urban areas. And on this note, I would want you to think of this question. I would want you to think of the question already given, that poverty is also an outcome of economic development. And then other question is, urban poverty in India is an overflow of rural poverty. What we'll do is, you just absorb this question, look at this question, think about this question, and on Monday, we'll start a discussion from here and move on to the next part, that is your hunger, right? So we will discuss these questions first. Please do think about this, whether urban poverty in India is overflow of rural poverty. One. Second is, poverty is also an outcome of economic development, because generally we think that with rising levels of development, levels of poverty will go down. Okay, so please do think about these ideas and do write the weekly test that most of you are not. Okay, so please write the weekly test, and let's meet on Monday again, and we will start a discussion here on. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.